Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and what the F is going on here? Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Now, this imperial behavior, revolutionary salute, this imperialistic behavior of Trump just won't be tolerated. And we have to discuss this. When I seen this, it disgusted me so much. I was so embarrassed from what our president was saying. This type of dictator talk, seizing people's property, really disgusts me. But he's been trapped, Shalom family. He's been trapped by Benjamin Netanyahu, who just sat there and smiled. But if Trump thinks that the Palestinian freedom fighters will kneel to the U.S. military, he got another thing coming.
You are talking tonight about the United States taking over a sovereign territory. What authority would allow you to do that? Are you talking about a permanent occupation there, redevelopment? And Mr. Prime Minister, do you see this idea as a way to expand the boundaries of Israel and to have a longer peace, even though the Israeli people know how important that land is to you and your citizens, just as the space is inherited by the Palestinians as well?
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs with something
that will be. That's a bold-faced lie. Nobody in America except the Zionists have said anything about them owning Palestinian land. This is crazy. Who's he talking to? Nobody voted for this. You can't be stealing people's land. That's imperialistic. It's 1.5 million people over there. You can't move them out of their territories.
Magnificent in a really magnificent area that nobody would know. Nobody can look because all they see is death and destruction and rubble and demolished buildings falling all over. It's just a terrible sight. I've studied it. I've studied this very closely over a lot of months, and I've seen it from every different angle. And it's a very, very dangerous place to be. And it's only going to get worse. And I think this is an idea that's gotten tremendous, and I'm talking about from the highest level of leadership, gotten tremendous praise. And if the United States can help to bring stability and peace in the Middle East, we'll do that. Bibi?
I mentioned again tonight our three goals. And the third goal is to make sure that Gaza never poses a threat to Israel again. President Trump is taking it to a much higher level. He sees a different future.
See what he just did? Hey, I was just trying to do one thing. President Trump has taken it to a much higher level. Because now he's saying the U.S. will own this territory. And that means the Zionists, that means the small hats, but that means they're going to use the full weight and might of the U.S. military to seize this land and still occupy these people's shit, which will make the U.S. war criminals, just like Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister are now war criminals and wanted by the ICC. Trump is putting his head on the chopping block for the same BS.
For that piece of land that has been the focus of so much terrorism, so many attacks against us, so many trials and so many tribulations. He has a different idea. And I think it's worth paying attention to this. We're talking about it. He's exploring it with his people, with his staff. I think it's something that could change history. And it's worthwhile really pursuing this avenue.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It'll change history for the worse for you guys. You're not sending them 1.5 million people off their territory. So we're going to get back to that. But I didn't know. I don't know what files he went there and showed Trump. You see, they still got the dirt. I told y'all before Trump got in there, the only people that he was defenseless against was the totality of the Zionists, not Bibi. Bibi just a puppet of the Zionist himself. It wasn't until I seen this video right here that's when I knew they had Trump trapped. And Trump, in this whole video, you could tell he's squirming. He's saying what he don't want to do. He forced to do it. Who can force this man to do what he don't want to do? The small hats. Watch.
Sir, this is a national security presidential memorandum that seeks to impose maximum pressure on the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Many of these provisions are similar to actions that your administration took during your first administration. The basic idea here is to have every department and agency, or many departments and agencies in your government attempt to sanction and control Iranian activities, particularly relating to the Iranian nuclear program and the Iranian export of terrorism through support of various proxy groups abroad. And the intent here is to give you all of the possible tools I'd say, engage with the Iranian government to ensure that going forward, they're less of a malign actor on the world stage.
So this is one that I'm torn about. Everybody wants me to sign it. I'll do that. It's very tough on Iran. It's what we had before. We would have never had the problem. You would have never had October 7th. We would have never had the problem had the election gone a different way, which it should have. But this one, I think, more than made up for it. I think we're doing things, and it shows that more than made up for it, much more historic. The Iran situation, hopefully, I'm going to sign it, but hopefully we're not going to have to use it very much. We will see whether or not we can arrange or work out a deal with Iran, and everybody can live together, and maybe that's possible, and maybe it's not possible. So I'm signing this, and I'm unhappy to do it, but I really have not so much choice because we have to be strong and firm, and I hope that it's not going to have to be used in any great measure at all. It'd be great if we could have a Middle East and maybe a world at total peace. Right now, you don't have that. When I left, you had peace all over the world, and now you have the world is blowing up. As you know, Bibi is coming in to see me later. Others are coming in to see me. We'll see what we can do. But I'm signing this, and hopefully it will be a document which won't be very important, will hardly have to be used.
So what kind of deal would you be prepared to make?
Well, we're going to see. I mean, we're going to see. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. With me, it's very simple. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. We don't want to be tough on Iran. We don't want to be tough on anybody, but they just can't have a nuclear weapon.
Mr. President, are you going to engage in conversations with your counterpart in Iran?
I would.
Do you want to block the sale of Iranian oil to other nations?
Well, we have the right to do that, and that's what I did before. And they had no money. They wouldn't have had the money for Hamas or Hezbollah and anybody else. It could have been solved. This thing, it just, if things went the way they should have, this would have been over long ago, but it's not over.
How close do you think Iran is to developing a nuclear weapon?
I think they're close. I think they're close. They're too close. But again, you could go back 4 years. I would have said they would have had it during this intervening period. But they're pretty close, Peter.
And why say that you're unhappy to sign it if it's Iran and their proxies who have threatened to retaliate against you and your team by killing you guys for taking out Soleimani?
Well, they haven't done that. And that would be a terrible thing for them to do. Not because of me. If they did that, they would be obliterated. That would be the end. I've left instructions. If they do it, they get obliterated. There won't be anything left. And they shouldn't be able to do it. And Biden should have said that, but he never did. I don't know why, lack of intelligence, perhaps. But he never said it. If that happens to a leader or close to a leader, frankly, if you had other people involved also, you would call for total obliteration of a state that did it. That would include Iran. So I'm signing this, and it's a very powerful document, but hopefully we're not going to have to.
While they were talking about assassinating Putin, ain't that something? Does that mean a total obliteration of the United States? Please, the CIA will whack you just to go to war with Iran. See, they got to stop talking crazy. But if he think he can seize the Gaza Strip, he gonna find out the hard way. That's a lie. But Netanyahu got trapped.
Their family members getting slaughtered, of their homes, their schools, their universities, their hospitals getting pulverized. Now they're hearing that the president of the United States will aid and abet the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
You can't live in Gaza right now, and I think we need another location. I think it should be a location that's going to make people happy. If we can get a beautiful area to resettle people permanently in nice homes and where they can be happy and not be shot, not be killed, not be knifed to death like what's happening in Gaza, I don't think people should be going back to Gaza.
Would Palestinians have the right to return to Gaza if they left while the rebuilding was
It
happening?
would be my hope that we could do something really nice, really good, where they wouldn't want to return.
How many people are you thinking about?
All of them.
Imagine that.
Few things
They're going to do something real nice, real good, where they won't want to ever go home again. This man has lost his goddamn mind. This is sick.
are more humiliating than the United States getting dog walked, the president of the United States getting dog walked by a foreign leader. And in this case, as is usually the case here in the United States, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, smirks as Donald Trump does his dirty work, his dirty bidding in promising to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip of Palestinians, forcing them off their land and essentially pressuring neighboring countries, particularly Egypt, to absorb them as refugees.
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, he had that sly smile on his face the whole time, Netanyahu, like he just ate a bird. But also he looked like he was a ventriloquist. And meanwhile, the puppet is talking. And so we just exchanged puppets. That's all that happened. And I told you that Trump would be worse than even Biden, who was horrific. And we told you that they had a deal. And that's why Netanyahu did that so-called ceasefire as soon as Trump came in. And the deal is, yeah, I destroyed Gaza. Now you use it as an excuse to expel all the Palestinians, and you help us with the ethnic cleansing. So there you go. Exactly as ordered by his boss, Trump came in and was like, yes, there, I'll do everything you ask. Even more pathetic than Joe Biden. Let's be clear about it.
So this was during a press conference between Netanyahu and Donald Trump. This was a long-planned press conference. Now, here's Trump stating that Palestinians would love to leave Gaza because he would know what's in their hearts and minds better than they do, and that they have absolutely no other alternative but to leave Gaza. Take a look.
I feel very differently about Gaza than a lot of people. I think they should get a good, fresh, beautiful piece of land, and we get some people to put up the money to build it and make it nice and make it habitable and enjoyable.
Well, where's this new land at? Where's this new home? See, Trump, that's what we want. Get us some of that land. Hold on, buddy. Here we go. Do you remember us, the ones who put you in office? You want to give us some of this promised land, this new promised land? This is disgusting. I'm gonna have to write the White House about this. I really am. Because I didn't know it was land to be given out around here. We need a piece. Beautiful piece of land. They got it. It's called Palestine. It's the Gaza Strip. It's the Gaza Strip. That's their shit.
Make it a
They
home.
don't want to leave, though. Palestinians say they don't want to leave.
I don't know how they could want to stay. It's a demolition site.
That amount of forcibly displacing those people from Gaza?
I don't think so. I think if they had the opportunity, they'd love them. If they had an alternative to Gaza, they have no alternative right now. I mean, they're there because they have no alternative. What do they have? It is a big pile of.
Oh yeah, we weren't gonna be able to escape. I kept the Zionists that's controlled the United States. I tell y'all, be ready for that, because no matter what president went there, they was so we're crystal clear. We're seeing this outrageous foolishness and nonsense. This is all war crime. What are you talking about? You can't force them people. That's ethnic cleansing. You can't force them people, no matter how you dress it up. It's a nice piece of land we're gonna provide them. You can't force them people to leave that land. And as soon as you do, you are a war criminal.
Of rubble.
Right, it is. It is a big pile of rubble. Why? Why is the Gaza Strip a big pile of rubble? Could it be due to the terrorist you're sitting next to, the prime minister of Israel? Could it be that that guy is the one who led the effort in essentially destroying the entirety of the Gaza Strip, killing tens of thousands of people, most of whom were innocent civilians, women, children, elderly people. And we're gonna pressure other countries to absorb Palestinians, help ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians, and essentially settle them as refugees in other neighboring countries. By the way, the neighboring countries, including Egypt, not in.
Shit, I think I've seen an article where Qatar, those backstabbing phonies, already said they was willing to accept some Palestinians. So Trump is gonna start twisting these people. Jordan, Egypt, he gonna force them. He gonna force them to do this.
Not interested, but when the pause on foreign aid was announced, remember there were two exceptions, and those two exceptions were Israel, of course. American taxpayers are the personal ATM machines for the Israeli people and Israeli government. There's no question about that. But there was also foreign aid continuing to flow to Egypt. Why? Maybe that's part of the bribery that the United States wants to engage in order to convince Egypt, to take Palestinians in.
Well, it's part of a peace deal that they made. And so the only reason Egypt's getting a dime is because Israel authorized it. Otherwise, they would never get anything. Now, understand the Middle East has no funding from America anymore at all, except Israel. So all their competitors wiped off the board. Now they don't, this is just a literal fact, and you can catch all sorts of emotions about it if you like, okay? You can catch them on both sides. But Israel went from being the country that we gave the most aid to being the only country we give aid to. And along with Egypt, only because Israel ordered it. So
whatever, Egypt get it.
Now they have all of our aid. And now we're canceling aid to the UN, to everyone else that might ever think about helping Palestinians. So what did you get? You got America first? No, you didn't. You got America second at best. Israel is always first. And by the way, if you're a Democrat, don't tell me that, you're outraged by this.
No, they love it.
Okay, because Joe Biden did the same goddamn thing. And all we heard from, I don't mean Democratic voters, Democratic officials, leadership, etc. Oh, it's great, Israel, we love you, we will obey you no matter what. And then what did Biden give them? Over $20 billion? We've now given over $300 billion to Israel. Okay, when do we get our end of this deal? And you can catch all kinds of feelings about this. I don't give a goddamn. I'm tired of this robbery. They bribe our officials through so-called campaign contributions. The Adelses have given $337 million to Donald Trump, Sheldon and Miriam, and they bought him on behalf of Israel. That is an undeniable fact. Anyone who is lunatic enough to say, no, I bet Trump's not affected by the $337 million. I bet Biden wasn't affected by the 11 million he got from AIPAC. I bet none of the politicians were affected by over $100 million that AIPAC spent in this election. Oh yeah, are they bought by Israel? Oh, that sounds so outrageous and offensive. No, the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinians, it is what is deeply offensive. The fact that all of our presidents are bought is deeply offensive. So MAGA, enjoy America second.
So Trump repeated that Jordan and Egypt should take in Palestinian refugees and that the whole Gaza Strip should be, his words, cleaned out. Now, additionally, Trump made it very clear who's running or calling the shots when it comes to foreign policy related to the Middle East. And you're gonna get a little taste of that in this next clip.
You're talking with President, with Prime Minister Netanyahu today. Do you intend to press him about how many deaths have been amongst Palestinians? Are you concerned about that death?
I talk about that too. Both sides mean a lot. I talk about that. I talk about the other side. I talk about everything.
What's your main message to him today during your meeting?
Well, I'm here to listen. He's here to see me, and I'm here to listen. So.
He's here to see me and I'm here to listen.
Yep.
I'm here to listen to my boss.
Yep.
Okay, the person who calls the shots, especially when it comes to what happens to Palestinians, the fate of the Palestinians, the land in the Middle East, the decisions I make about Middle East foreign policy. It is so utterly disgusting. But this is what we're dealing with, right? I mean, the bribery is a huge problem. It impacts both parties. But you're right, Biden didn't go as far as Trump is willing to go in aiding and abetting the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. But I just want to take a quick moment to talk about what Biden did do. Because Biden refused to use his leverage. He refused to
You see
withhold.
how disgusting that is. See what because they still got to get the Democratic checks instead of telling the truth. All of the mass murder and mayhem happened up on the Democratic watch. Here's Trump telling you, hey, let's move them out. He ain't moved them out yet, which is disgusting what he's saying. But they say, oh, what he did is way worse. Then the murder of 80,000 people, the wounding of 100,000, that happened under Biden them. But they want to fool people. See, with Trump went in there, it could be a little bit better. This is disgusting. He just laid the naked aggression down at the feet of our politicians, all of them bought and paid for by the Zionists. Like I said, Trump is no different. I tell you, when it comes to serving the small hats, I said that was going to happen. That's disgusting.
American weapons and military aid to Israel until Israel agreed to a ceasefire. When you don't use any sticks at all, there is no incentive to bring Israel to the negotiating table in good faith to actually sign a ceasefire deal. So his mess bled into the new Trump administration, thus allowing Trump to do whatever he pleases.
Yeah, so that was wonderfully pathetic, as he said, big, bad, tough guy Donald Trump. Oh, nobody's the boss of Donald Trump. He'll do whatever he wants. And he said, oh, I'm here to listen. I'm gonna listen, Benjamin. Please keep sending the money. Oh, Trump, pathetic. I'm here to listen. Yeah, why don't you send another $300 billion of our money to your overlords? So come on, man, there's not a person in the country that isn't a moron or a mainstream media reporter who doesn't realize that Washington, D.C. is occupied territory. It is totally owned and controlled by Israel. And so if you deny that, you're denying reality.
It is February 3rd, 2025, and the US Agency for International Development has apparently gone dark from its website to its social media accounts to its headquarters. And not only has the Trump administration announced a freeze on most foreign aid for the next 90 days, but Trump and Elon Musk are now waging war on USAID, raising questions about whether it could be gone for good. So is this the start of a new era? Or should we be concerned about the CIA just finding other ways to fund the government overthrows that it organizes and supports all around the world? Well, we're going to get into all of that and more here in today's video. And just a quick reminder, if you want to support my work, if you're interested in additional exclusive content behind the paywall, all of that is available for my paid subscribers on Patreon and Substack. I have a new exclusive episode of my weekly series called Sanctioned up right now that you can go check out over there, and I will leave all of the links in the description box below. All right, let's get into the latest. So as we've been covering, the Trump administration is only a couple weeks old. They come in and they immediately decide upon a 90-day freeze on foreign funding. Most foreign funding, as it's being reported, that Israel and Egypt, they still have access to their foreign assistance. And you've got Zelensky coming out immediately saying, oh, don't worry, our military aid is doing just fine, right? This doesn't apply to that. But we haven't really heard much from the Trump administration directly in terms of what this freeze actually means, how long it's going to last. Could it last past that 90-day mark? Or is this all just a stunt to make a bunch of headlines and then they quietly go back to funding everything as usual? And one of the impacts from this freeze is that the US Agency for International Development, or USAID, has essentially been rendered useless because that is their entire job, is to send out foreign assistance all around the world. It's why it makes it very useful for other government agencies, like, say, the CIA, when they want to overthrow another government in a sovereign nation. They just send out funding through institutions like USAID. They also heavily use the National Endowment for Democracy. And those agencies serve as a front for the CIA to, get that money over to those countries, to pay those protesters, to pay media outlets, to make sure that things shift in the direction that they are looking for, which is in direct opposition to the government that they are trying to overthrow. Therefore, it comes as no surprise that USAID's budget for this year stands at a whopping $42.8 billion with a B dollars. And that's just a portion of the around $72 billion that the US spends on foreign assistance worldwide every single year, with the report saying that that money went to everything from women's health in conflict zones to access to clean water, HIV and AIDS treatments, energy security, and anti-corruption work, and noting that the US provided 42% of all humanitarian aid tracked by the United Nations in 2024. And I love how they make it sound like the US is just doing all of this good and generous work, right? We're just sending humanitarian aid out all around the world to the people who need it most, when in reality, the US is actively using humanitarian aid as a weapon. Sure, they'll send it to countries where they like the government, where they like the way that things are going, and they like the access that they get to that country's natural resources. But at the same time, they will also withhold humanitarian aid from countries where they don't approve of the government. And they will spend a lot of money in countries where they decide to fund the opposition to the government with the aim of overthrowing it. Now, they'll also notably spend a lot of money in countries where they're trying to compete with other countries, like, say, China, which is why you may have heard this soundbite floating around the internet last week, which came from the brand new White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
Doge and OMB also found that there was about to be 50 million taxpayer dollars that went out the door to fund condoms in Gaza. That is a preposterous waste of taxpayer money. So that's what this pause is focused on.
The only problem is that she's not talking about the Gaza that you're thinking of, that I'm thinking of, and that she's definitely thinking of, which is, of course, the Gaza Strip. She's actually referring to the Gaza province, which is found in East Africa. That's where, as Al Jazeera reported, according to the HHS grants database, the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation in Mozambique has received more than $83 million in funding since 2021 for reproductive health projects in 2 provinces, and one of them is, you guessed it, Gaza. And I know that we're only a couple weeks in, but I am begging any member of the Trump administration who took this stat and handed it down to the press secretary, or maybe she found it herself, I am begging all of y'all to just do a little bit of a fact check and maybe look beyond just the word Gaza to see where in the world we're actually talking about here. I mean, it's no secret that the US government pours out so much money and funding around the world that it really can't keep up with it. And the public certainly isn't keeping up with it because the media isn't telling them about it. That's why you have people like Republican Senator Rand Paul, who recognizes Festivus every year on December 23rd, where he airs his grievances with federal government spending. And he draws attention to the fact that American taxpayers were responsible for the $20 million that USAID spent creating an Arabic version of the kids' TV show Sesame Street, or that the State Department allocated more than $32,000 in funding for breakdancing. Yes, breakdancing. And that's just the funny, lighthearted version of US foreign funding, because the reality is that the majority of it goes towards the projects that are carried out by USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, which act as the vehicles for the CIA's regime change operations around the world. And if you don't believe me, just look at who the NED added to their board of directors back in September 2024, none other than the Maidan midwife herself, Victoria Nuland. And that brings me to a very important point, because while we can sit here and talk about how the CIA has orchestrated government coups all around the world for decades now, Ukraine is the perfect example of the way that they do it. Okay, so we look at the calendar and we know that February 22nd, 2014 is when the official Maidan coup happened, right? The official overthrow of the democratically elected government in Kiev. That's when it's on the books. But it didn't just start on February 22nd. Oh no, you had months leading up to it, months of protest. And those protests did not just happen organically. In fact, if we look back at what was happening in January 2014, you had members of the Obama administration testifying before Congress and bragging about U.S. involvement in those very protests that were going on over in Ukraine. Take this clip of Thomas Melia, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Democracy, who testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on January 15, 2014.
While the protests on the Maidan across the country may have lost some of their numbers, they have lost none of their intensity. The embers that sparked the protests in late November are still burning and will not be easily extinguished. The tens of thousands of people who turned out again this past weekend in Kiev and other cities across Ukraine, now in the third month of these protests, testify to this. And thanks to the support of this committee and the Congress, we have invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals to ensure a secure, prosperous, and democratic Ukraine.
$5 billion in investments into a more prosperous and democratic Ukraine, they say. It was more than a month before the government in Kiev would officially be overthrown, and yet you had the State Department employee sitting there, notably next to Victoria Nuland herself, although she wasn't featured in that video, and he's talking about the current situation in Kiev. He then goes on to talk further about the role that USAID was playing directly in keeping this movement going in Kiev.
Since 2009 alone, when President Obama took office, the U.S. government has provided more than $184 million in assistance to Ukraine in programs under the rubric of governing justly and democratically. Those programs which focus on professional development programs for judges, members of parliament, legal advocates, civil society and democratic political parties, elections, and independent media. Most of this is managed, and I would say managed well, by our colleagues at the U.S. Agency for International Development, led by Paige Alexander and her colleagues at the mission in Ukraine.
So the coup that was orchestrated by the State Department and funded through USAID was successful. Then what? Well, the funding doesn't just stop there. In fact, it has continued to flow to Ukraine ever since. Which is why you now have reports that NGOs across Ukraine are freaking out in response to Trump's funding freeze, that the overwhelming majority of media outlets don't know what they're going to do or where they're going to get funding. But don't you worry, because billionaire Elon Musk, who has profited heavily from and arguably is where he is today because of the government contracts that he has signed on to, oh no, he is here to assure us that everything's going to be fine. That his new fancy Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, is going to fix everything because it's desperate to make a name for itself, and this is the perfect place for it to be. Elon declared during a live session on X Spaces early on Monday that when it comes to USAID, quote, it became apparent it's not an apple with a worm in it. What we have is just a ball of worms. You've got to basically get rid of the whole thing. It's beyond repair. We're shutting it down, which sounds great in theory, right? I mean, I just listed one very small example of the corruption that USAID has allowed to flourish around the world. And I didn't even really get into what we could talk about when it comes to Ukraine corruption, right? We could talk about Afghanistan or all of these different countries around the world where USAID has had a hand in carrying out the CIA's interests there. But the only problem is that I don't trust the US government, and I certainly do not trust Elon Musk. I mean, I love how he comes up with a different personality every day, every few weeks, really, because we have to remember that this is the exact same man who was previously declaring that when it came to the US government organizing the coup of Evo Morales in Bolivia in 2019 in order to gain access to the country's vast wealth of lithium, Musk said, quote, "We will coup whoever we want, deal with it." Because the thing is, even if the Trump administration officially does away with USAID and the NED and all of these other We Bring Democracy alphabet agencies that are showing up on your doorstep to overthrow your government, that is not going to change the CIA at its core. That is not going to stop the CIA and the State Department from orchestrating government coups all around the world. The only thing it's going to do is just make them look for a different means of funding those efforts. And as geopolitical analyst and host of the New Atlas, Brian Berletic, pointed out on X, if agencies like USAID and the NED are actually eliminated, then the work they are doing will be transferred back to covert operations conducted by organizations like the CIA, making them more difficult to detect and expose. This will enhance, not deter, US interference abroad. And that brings us to the second term of the Trump administration, where they act as though they are the good, here to save us from the bad, evil Biden administration, right? Republicans good, Democrats bad. Except that's not how any of this works, because they're all on the same team at the end of the day. I mean, take someone like Elon Musk, for example. I know that I mentioned that he seems to really change his personality, change his views. And part of the reason that I say that is because it was Elon Musk who spent months last year going after Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, right? Claiming that he was not the rightful president of his own country after an election that was held in his country. Elon Musk is not a Venezuelan citizen. He was not there observing the elections. This man has no idea what he's talking about. And when you look at that current situation, you go, okay, Elon, you want to overthrow Nicolas Maduro? How do you think you're going to do it? How do you think that the funding is going to play out in order to make that happen? Because it's not like the US just shows up to a sovereign nation and says, okay, we're overthrowing your government. Now, no, there is a lot more that goes into it. There's a lot more funding. That's why they have CIA fronts like the NED and like USAID there to carry out that funding through various NGOs and media organizations in order to set the tone that they want in that country and against the current government. Speaking of Venezuela, the first term of the Trump administration actively tried to overthrow Nicolas Maduro. Then they weren't successful, but that doesn't mean that they didn't try. That doesn't mean that they didn't use all of these different agencies to then throw money at Venezuela. In that case, it was the current quote unquote interim president they claim that they were recognizing, Juan Guaido, who is now a resident of Florida, by the way. He's clearly not the president of Venezuela, but it does not mean that just because Trump is here, that is somehow going to save us from the CIA being the CIA, because it's not about Democrats, it's not about Republicans or Joe Biden or Donald Trump or anything else at the end of the day. It's about the fact that the US empire carries out these government coups around the world and has done for decades, because at the end of the day, it benefits the US establishment. And while they may feel like they are at the height of the empire, they don't seem to have done enough research to learn, or maybe they think they are just above how every single empire has met its end in the past and how it will more than likely continue to do so in the future, especially if it continues on the destructive path that the US is on right now. And that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and
Whether you like it or not, Donald Trump has deputized Elon Musk to head this agency that's designed to eliminate waste, as the White House sees it. Wasteful spending, unnecessary spending. And so when the people that are part of this effort that Donald Trump has created after he won the election went to USAID, and it's happened in other agencies too, you see almost this physical resistance, like, how dare you come into our realm? You don't run us. You're just the elected part of the government. We're this agency that exists independent of you. Where does this mentality come from that they have this right to pursue their own agenda independent of any elected officials or elected parts of the government?
Well, the entire agency exists as a carefully constructed lie. And just like James Clapper and John Brennan and Leon Panetta, these are the holders of the great American, closet of skeletons of state secrets. And you don't just hand that over to a random taxi cab driver because 51% of the population elected him because he does funny TikTok dances. What I'm trying to say here is if you remember the recalcitrance around sharing intelligence with President Trump, both in his 2016 presidential run and then again in the lead up to the 2024 election, I think what's happening at USAID is essentially an echo of that, which is that USAID is supposed to be untouchable. I mean, virtually, there's no USAID project on God's green earth that is honest. If we are irrigating the rivers, or irrigating the agricultural fields in a country, it's because we're trying to control the territory there. If we are working on the water supply, it's because we're trying to control the rivers. If we're working on famine relief, it's because we're trying to control the food supply and make inroads into the indigenous populations there. If we are helping them write their constitution and go through democratic legal reform, it's so that we can control their laws. Every single thing USA does is dual purpose. It's dual purpose by charter. They're only allowed to do the things that advance U.S. foreign policy interest. And we just put a little bow on top of it, and we say, in the process, we're making the world a better place. Because it's it's going to these humanitarian groups who are administering this thing, which in the process will help U.S. foreign interests. But the fact is the worst scandals in American statecraft in the 1960s and 70s and maybe early 80s were the CIA. In recent years, the worst scandals in American statecraft have been USAID, from funding the Wuhan lab to growing heroin in Afghanistan and irrigating the poppy fields, to setting up fake Twitter in Cuba with an explicit USAID document saying that the plan is to have algorithms favoring sports, news, and hurricane updates. And then once we have enough people, switch to get them to hate their government and topple their government and take to the streets in smart riots, to them even using public health HIV prevention clinics as undercover for USAID workers doing intelligence work to get people to overthrow their governments. And this gets me to another point that I'd feel remiss if I didn't say, because I've been thinking about it so long and haven't really had a venue to just kind of open say it. But which is this:
open and say everything that you want, because this is the venue for it.
You recall how in 2011 the CIA was busted running a fake vaccine clinic in Pakistan. Do you remember this?
Yeah, to find Osama bin Laden was their claim, and they undercut all kinds of confidence for years. That was the claim, was they wanted to register these people in the hope of getting connection with the population, but it was a fake vaccine program. Vaccine activists were angry because they had worked so hard to build confidence in vaccines, and it turned out that it was a whole fake plan and designed to get the United States to get data on Pakistanis.
Yes, right. Had nothing to do with David Petraeus' counterinsurgency manual calling to collect 85% of the country's biometrics. Yeah, it was just Osama bin Laden. But the fact is they were caught flat busted in that situation with a fake vaccine drive, fake vaccine clinics, and that was 2011. It took them 16 months to issue a written statement, a non-binding written statement, that they would no longer use vaccination work or public health facilities to do intelligence work out of. So we have a non-binding written statement from the CIA that took them 16 months of fighting it to issue, to say that we will no longer use our public health facilities as a front for CIA work. Well, given that USAID is CIA, there is no daylight between those two organizations. That is why you see the likes of AOC and Chuck Schumer saying that if Elon Musk gets access to the highly classified documents at USAID HQ, it will put U.S. national security at grave risk. Well, what is a humanitarian aid NGO sponsor doing with so many troves of such highly classified state secrets that it will massively endanger all of U.S. national security if somebody outside of USAID reads it? That's the sort of thing that you typically would reserve for a CIA or NSA level document. But the fact is that's USAID for you. But USAID is not under that obligation, that this non-binding. We don't know that when CIA pledged to not use public health facilities for intelligence work, that the baton wasn't just handed off to its identical twin cousin, USAID. And I have an open question. When you look at the fact, for example, that HIV clinics in Cuba and the Western Hemisphere were being used by US as cover for color revolution work, formal cover. In fact, in their own documents, they said that the HIV program would be the perfect excuse because Cuban counterintelligence would never think to look there. Well, how many other public health facilities operated by USAID are doing the same thing in Africa, in South America, in Eastern Europe, in Central Asia? And so I guess what I'm getting at here is turning over that level of scandal. It's bad enough if Americans know it, but it becomes an international incident. I mean, one of the things that I ran into at State, Glenn, which you might find interesting, is when we were trying to convince foreign countries to move off of Huawei, what they would turn, because it's back channeled by the CCP and Chinese intelligence, we would get hit with a counter argument. Well, you want us to use American, IT architecture, but Snowden. We read the Snowden files.
Yeah, that was part of the big story that we published, was that they were, backdooring that same technology. At the same time, they were telling people not to use the Chinese companies because they were backdooring it. We were backdooring it. In fact, we were intercepting the devices that people around the world ordered, opening the devices the FBI was, and putting in the technology that would allow us to backdoor that equipment. And of course, that created skepticism when we were trying to convince them not to use OI and other Chinese companies.
Right. So, the point that I'm driving at here is these things. The Snowden story is very easy to look at as an American, and the concern that I think folks in the blob, folks in the national security complex and the international relations complex have is, it's if only Americans learned how bad USAID was and what it was really doing. For example, if that story I just mentioned in Bangladesh, if Americans had full access to everything that USAID and its spindle groups were doing in all these other countries, that's one conversation. That's bad enough, but maybe tolerable. But the problem is when other countries learn about this, it becomes a diplomatic incident. It becomes something that harms our standing with partnered nations, and with it makes neutrals want to turn to Russia and China instead of the United States because we look like the bad guy. It harms our standing at the UN. It allows foreign countries who may be hostile or neutral to us to hold up these scandals in front of the UN and move international favor against the U.S., which then can have trickle-down effects on our national security, our economic engagements in various countries. It can sever trust in countries that we're trying to court, and that then harms the economic interests of all the different private sector companies who draft behind the battering ram of American statecraft. You have everything from the tech companies to the oil companies, to you name it.
Let me ask you about that, though, because that, I think, is central to this whole discussion. I mean, first of all, I think there's a lot of recognition of what the real function of Ned is and US aid is outside of the United States. In fact, Russia expelled US aid because Hillary Clinton's State Department was funding all those agitations and anti-Putin protest movements on the street. But then even just, over the last couple of days, you have the president of El Salvador, who's pretty much tied to the international populist right, saying nobody wants US aid in our countries. It just, destabilizes it. It's designed to divide, as you were saying. But then you have the president of Mexico, who's, very much on the left, saying pretty much the same thing, that these, are not here to help. They're quite the opposite. So in some way, I think it's almost reverse. It's like the world knows this. It's Americans that don't. And that's true of so many things. But what I wanted to ask you is, let me just ask you about the defense of people who defend US aid, including all these congressional Democrats who are marching in front of there as though they were defending something noble, the CIA front. That's what the Democratic Party is now. They would say, and I think defenders of the blob, the people on the blob would say, if you don't exert this influence in these other countries, even especially with the pretense of helping, we're building an irrigation system for you, we're doing this, we're doing that, even though we have ulterior motives, if we withdraw from that, if we defund that, China is just going to go in and do it, or the Russians will do it, or the Iranians will do it, and we will end up harming ourselves. What about that argument?
No, there's a lot here, and fundamentally, my hesitation in responding is because I don't know exactly what's motivating the high-level thinking on this, because the answer to that question depends on what happens next. Because technically, USAID HQ is set to shut down if Trump and Musk win on this. But the plan is to fold it under the State Department. And I posted this on X just a little bit ago. But the fundamental thrust of it was killing USAID does not end USAID. Killing USAID as an organization does not end USAID as a function. If the State Department is now inheriting the USAID's portfolio, so USAID is essentially going to be, the State Department is basically going to inherit I think I used the phrase, USAID herpes complex attached. It's basically going to be State Department with USAID herpes attached now, unless the actual programs are cut, the grants are cut. In a sense, I was joking to a friend earlier, sort of lovingly tongue in cheek, but that maybe I was joking that I don't really mean this, but that maybe this whole thing was Marco Rubio's idea, so that he could be the most powerful Secretary of State in modern history, running not just the State Department but USAID as well. Because
let me stop you there for a second, because I don't know if you saw this, but we have Rubio answering reporters' questions about how he's now the acting director of U.S. aid, and here's what he has to say. I'm interested in your reaction to that. Let's go ahead and play that.
Well, look, my frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so. So the functions of USAID, there are a lot of functions of USAID that are going to continue, that are going to be part of American foreign policy, but it has to be aligned with American foreign policy. I said very clearly during my confirmation hearing that every dollar we spend and every program we fund, that will be aligned with the national interest of the United States. And USAID has a history of sort of ignoring that and deciding that they're somehow a global charity separate from the national interest. These are taxpayer dollars. And so I'm very troubled by these reports that they've been unwilling to cooperate with people who are asking simple questions about what does this program do, who gets the money, who are our contractors, who's funded. And that sort of level of insubordination makes it impossible to conduct a sort of mature and serious review that I think foreign aid writ large should have. We're spending taxpayer money here. These are not donor dollars. These are taxpayer dollars. And we owe the American people the assurances that every dollar we are spending abroad is being spent on something that furthers our national interest. And so far, a lot of the people that work at USAID have just simply refused to cooperate.
So what is your reaction to that? And I don't know how well you can hear, but that gets to the things that I was worried about, which is what they're really after here are the things that just don't matter. You know, the actual just sort of like charitable stuff that some ideologue inside USA decided to fund, but that they do want to continue the kinds of programs you were describing that in their minds do advance U.S. interests in a way that that might involve bringing divisiveness to various countries. Although then again, if you listen to other things Marco Rubio is saying, he does seem to think we're overextended and over-involved in the world. So I'm just kind of curious what your reaction to his perception is.
Well, I don't think USAID is ideological at all. I actually think they are the most cold, calculating, ideologically agnostic organization in the U.S. federal government. And to what Marco Rubio said there, that's the reason you park it at USAID. It's because what if the in-power administration at the State Department doesn't want something to be done or has a slightly different opinion on it? USAID allows basically a rogue group within the intelligence community to continue to carry out operations under the banner of being totally independent and siloed away. But I will note that under the Biden administration, before the major falling out towards the end with Kamala Harris and the sort of DNC civil war that broke up what was a total party unanimity with the whip hand in Congress, holding congressional Democrats as a total block, as well as at the executive level. But if folks recall, USAID was born in the early 1960s, 1961, 62. It was never on the National Security Council until just 3 years ago under Joe Biden. Joe Biden considered USAID to be so important that he put Samantha Powers on the National Security Council, to directly coordinate, CIA and State Department interagency activity. And so the point that I'm getting at here is there has long been a fight between the CIA and Congress over oversight. This was the heart, for example, of the start of Bill Barr's career, when he started his career in the CIA and went to Knight Law School, while working at the CIA, and then his first real substantive CIA job was as the CIA's liaison to Congress to block congressional investigations into CIA malfeasance during Iran-Contra during the early Reagan years. The CIA gives out internal awards around operational security, and there's weird histories with some of that involving obfuscating congressional efforts to actually get access and oversight to the CIA, even on the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. So USAID is able to block that out. USAID is basically doing the same sort of obfuscations that the CIA used to do, but USAID is where the operations of CIA happen. CIA mostly plays the liaison role for operations, but they have no assets to play with unless USAID capacity built them.
Yeah, I think what all this reveals, at least as much as anything, is precisely the fact that there is a massive part of our federal government that operates completely unto itself. They perceive their entitlement as operating outside of democratic accountability. And the fact that they are so resistant to any control by the executive branch, to any control by the State Department, that the Democratic Party acts as though this is some grave assault on the national interest to put them inside the State Department when they're operating as an arm of the federal government anyway. I think it really reveals the fact that not only is there this deep state that has been there to resist Donald Trump and the outcome of the election, but also partnering with the Democratic Party to do it. And whatever Elon Musk's motives are, and I'm not sure how well thought out they are at this point, but whatever they are, anything that just kind of crushes that structure and starts bringing it out into the spotlight and letting people understand what it really is and how it functions, I consider to be a positive thing. And your work has been as instrumental as anyone's in helping people understand that.
rose 54% to a record high. Comment, tell them the judge sent you.
Professor Mearsheimer, welcome here, my dear friend. As we speak, quite literally, Prime Minister Netanyahu is arriving at the White House. Does he have his hat in his hand?
No, I don't think so. I think that what's going on here is Netanyahu just wants to come over and establish the fact that he and Israel continue to have very close relations with the United States. And they'll talk over all the various issues that are on the table. They'll come to some general agreement or broad agreement on how to deal with these issues. But I don't think anything really important is going to come out of it. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, the Trump administration just took power 15 days ago. It's so soon after taking power that they're in no position to have formulated clear policies on any particular issue that concerns Israel and move forward with it. Just too early. And with regard to Netanyahu, he's just in a heap of trouble. Israel is in a heap of trouble after Gaza. And I think the Israelis and Netanyahu in particular just want to come over and shake hands with Donald Trump and just send a clear signal to the Israeli public and to the world that the United States still backs Israel.
I want to ask you about all the trouble that he's in, but before we do that, Donald Trump or someone in his administration announced a tranche of $1 billion in military equipment going to Israel. Now, I don't know how much that is. It seems like an awful lot to me. For what? They've already destroyed Gaza. They've already engaged in genocide for 15 months.
Well, I don't think they're sending that weaponry because it's going to be used right away. I think they're probably just building up the inventory for the next time they go on a rampage. But with regard to paying for that, as best I can tell from reading the newspapers, that's going to be paid for with the annual money that we give to Israel. So we're not giving them extra money. We're giving them weapons that we're paying for, and they're not. It's coming out of the money, the many billions of dollars that we give them every year. So I don't think it's that big a deal, to be honest.
What did Netanyahu gain by destroying Gaza? Hamas is still alive and well, is it not?
Yes. I mean, they certainly killed a huge number of Palestinians. They're rightly accused of genocide. There are criminal warrants out from the ICC for both Prime Minister Netanyahu and his former defense minister, Yoav Gallant. So they've paid a real price for this. And of course, the Palestinians have paid a real price for it. But otherwise, we're sort of back to where we were on October 6th. The Palestinians are going to end up in a giant open air prison or remain in an giant open air prison. The Israelis are apparently getting out of Gaza. And furthermore, Hamas is alive and well, and Hamas is going to be in charge, as was the case on October 6th, the day before October 7th. So it's hard to see how Israel's situation has improved in any meaningful way. As you and I both know, their principal goal was to ethnically cleanse Gaza, to get the Palestinians out. But they have categorically failed in that regard. So I think that this was, for Israel, a disaster.
And if Trump says, hey, Bibi, do you plan to comply with Section 2 and Section 3 of the ceasefire agreement? Should Trump believe whatever Netanyahu's response is?
Well, the thing is, I think that Netanyahu at this point has a vested interest in going along with the ceasefire agreement. I mean, he wants to get all of the hostages out. There's a political imperative inside of Israel to do that. And he has to continue negotiating on what the second phase of the hostage or of the ceasefire is going to look like. And then he has to go through with the second stage to get the hostages out. I don't see him backtracking on that. And with regard to going back in, after he gets the Israeli forces out, the idea of going back into Gaza or even starting the bombing again, what would be the purpose of that? They did this for about 15 months, right? And what good did it do? As we just said, it did hardly any good at all. So
Right.
bombing Gaza and making the rubble bounce doesn't buy you much. Killing more Palestinians doesn't solve Israel's problem. So I think that it's likely that Netanyahu will, in good part, not completely, but in good part, go along with the ceasefire, and Gaza will remain an open-air prison. And
Does he run the risk of his government collapsing, of Finance Minister Smotrich and his colleagues leaving the government if he goes along with the second phase of the ceasefire, which involves the total military withdrawal from Gaza of the IDF?
Well, Smotrich has said that he would withdraw if that happens. And if that were to happen, the government would collapse in all likelihood. I actually think there's a good chance that one of the reasons that Netanyahu came to see not Joe Biden, to see Trump, was so that he could come out of that meeting and say Trump is deeply committed to the ceasefire, and Trump insists that I go along with the second phase. So in a certain way, Netanyahu could put the blame for going on to the second phase of the ceasefire on Trump's shoulders. And I think Trump would be willing to go along with that. So I think that's a serious possibility here. And maybe that ploy can be used to get Smotrich not to resign.
Before we jump over to Ukraine, Professor Mearsheimer, here's Senator Graham. I couldn't resist. I think he's at his worst here, but here he is on one of the talk shows on Sunday. Chris, cut number 11.
So what this resolution does, it lays out the case against Iran's nuclear ambition. Bibi and the Israelis are going to have to make a decision relatively soon what to do about the Iran nuclear program. This is not an authorization to use force, but I'm here to tell you and the audience and the world that I think America should support an effort by Israel if they decide to decimate the Iranian nuclear program, because I think it's a threat to mankind. Israel is strong, Iran is weak. Hezbollah, Hamas have been decimated. They're not finished off, but they've been weakened. And there's an opportunity to hit the Iran nuclear program in a fashion I haven't seen in decades.
That we all have different opinions, but you tell me if this statement is even remotely accurate. Israel is strong, Iran is weak, Hezbollah and Hamas have been decimated.
Well, whether Hezbollah and Hamas have been decimated, which they haven't, is largely irrelevant regarding the question of whether we can attack Iran. Almost everybody agrees that I know, including many Israelis, that Israel itself cannot attack Iran's nuclear facilities and do away with them. There is some possibility, and it's only a possibility, that we can do it, we meaning the United States. And even if we succeed, almost everybody I know agrees that the Iranians will then develop a new capability somewhere else, which is hard to find and hard to hit, and they will end up with nuclear weapons. So military force does not solve this problem. Now, very importantly, Donald Trump is not interested in using military force against Iran. He doesn't want a war. And I would note to you, today, the day he's meeting Benjamin Netanyahu, he issued, or his administration issued, a directive that said we are restoring the maximum pressure campaign against Iran. And our goal is to drive their oil exports down to zero. So what Trump is doing is he is saying, I'm not using force, I'm going to use economic pressure. And that's starting today, the day that Netanyahu is visiting him in the White House. And he will be able to argue for a number of months onward that we are dealing with the Iran nuclear problem, and we are doing it with maximum economic pressure, not military force.
Let's not forget that Donald Trump has his own Smotrich to contend with, so to speak, and that's Miriam Adelson. Well, she's not in the government, but she's a very influential person. You know this better than anybody in the country, Professor, in the donor group. No?
No, you don't want to put too much emphasis on her. There are a significant number of individuals and institutions in the Israel lobby who wield enormous power.
More than she does.
Much more than she does. But the question is, can they get us to attack Iran? That's the question. In other words, you're hypothesizing a situation where the Israelis want us to attack Iran. Trump doesn't want to attack Iran, but
Right.
the lobby is so powerful that it gets Trump to attack Iran. I don't think that's going to happen. As powerful as the lobby is on that issue, I don't think that they'll get their way.
Switching gears, General Kellogg, who's the president's advisor on Ukraine, emissary on Ukraine, whatever you want to call him, one of these positions like Elon Musk has. It doesn't exist in the government. It's not paying, and it doesn't have Senate confirmation. Nevertheless, says he wants a ceasefire and 2 general elections in 2025, one for president in Ukraine and one for the parliament. And of course, President Zelensky, who's not really the president, has rejected this. Where are they going with this?
Well, with regard to a ceasefire, it's quite clear that the Trump people have wanted a ceasefire for a long time, but they're not going to get a ceasefire because the Russians are smart enough to know that's not in their interest. It's in their interest to continue the war and to go to the bargaining table to get a meaningful peace agreement. So they're not going to get a ceasefire.
Absolutely.
I think with regard to Zelensky, there's a lot of evidence that we are interested in pushing Zelensky overboard, that we view him as an obstacle to getting some sort of meaningful agreement with the Russians. And the reason we want an election, so the argument goes, is that we know Zelensky will lose someone will come in to replace him who is more pliable, who we can work with and get to go along with our ideas on how to shut this conflict down. So I think that is what is happening here with Zelensky.
And Zelensky himself said as recently as Sunday, and this is an incredible statement. I'll characterize it and then we'll play the clip. The United States is supposed to have given $100 billion in cash and they only received $75 billion. He assumes the other 25 has been stolen. This is from the most corrupt government in the Western world. Who would have stolen it? Cut number 12.
When they say that Ukraine during the war received $200 billion to support the army, etc., that's not true. I don't know where all this money is.
What was your reaction to the freeze in U.S. foreign aid to organizations that included those in Ukraine? And are you concerned that this might be followed by a potential freeze in military aid?
Look, as the president of a warring country, I tell you, we received just over $75 billion. That is 100 billion of these 177 billion, or 200 billion, some people even say, we have never received. And this is important. Because we are talking about specific things. Because we got it not with money, but with weapons. We got 70 billion something worth of it.
Is he accusing Americans of stealing the money, or he's looking the other way while his compatriots are stealing it?
To be honest, who knows? I mean, this just shows you what a mess Ukraine is and has been since the beginning. I mean, everybody's known that Ukraine was a remarkably corrupt government, but we played that aspect of its political system down and instead portrayed it as this great liberal democracy that was fighting against the forces of evil. But now what's happening, now that we're recognizing where this war is headed and that Zelensky's an obstacle, all of this is beginning to come out. But it's not surprising.
I have to go back to Gaza because Prime Minister Netanyahu apparently hasn't arrived yet, or he's in the building and he hasn't come out yet. It's not clear to me which is the case. However, President Trump did say before Netanyahu arrived that he wants to find a new homeland for the Palestinians rather than reconstruct Gaza because they cannot go back due to the devastation wrought by Israel's war. That would be music to Netanyahu's ears, I would think.
Yeah, but the problem is they have gone back. They're gone back, and they have no intention of leaving. The Israelis pounded them for about 15 months. They executed a genocide, all aimed at driving the Palestinians out of Gaza, and they failed. Moreover, the countries surrounding Gaza, where the Palestinians are supposed to go, and here we're talking about Jordan and Egypt, have made it unequivocally clear that they won't accept those people. Furthermore, this is a crime against humanity, and it violates international law. And Trump would be foolish in the extreme to pursue this policy, especially since it's not going to work anyway.
Well, where's he going to get them to go? And no matter what they bribe General al-Sisi with or King Abdullah with, Egypt and Jordan can't take 750,000 Palestinians. The governments would be toppled.
I think that that's right. But again, I would emphasize the Palestinians are not leaving. They've just proven that over the past 15 months, they're not leaving. So it's not only that there's no government that's likely to take them, they don't want to leave. And I would like to know, how does President Trump intend to get the Palestinians to leave? He never answers that question. He thinks they're going to leave voluntarily. I would not bet a lot of money on that.
Yeah. The website of the State Department apparently posted the fact that under the United States law, we have a one China policy. Nothing new, except that did not appear in the last 4 years under Joe Biden's or Tony Blinken's State Department. Are you surprised? Are you pleased? Are you displeased?
I'm not sure what you're saying now. What did the Trump administration do?
On the State Department website made it very clear that there was a one China policy, that Taiwan is part of China. This, of course, was the opposite of what Joe Biden preached when he said we would defend Taiwan.
No, I don't think that's true. I think that Joe Biden also supported a one China policy. And nevertheless, we have long argued that we would defend Taiwan if the circumstances were right. I think that nothing really changed under Biden and nothing is changing under Trump. I think the policy has been pretty consistent.
Well, what does one China policy mean if we're going to take up arms against the mainland when they want to assert their lawful jurisdiction over Taiwan?
Well, when we worked out the arrangements with Taiwan and China, when we got the Chinese to switch sides and be our allies during the Cold War, the issue of Taiwan was a really tricky issue for us because we had supported Taiwan and we argued that Taiwan was really China. And we didn't want to completely abandon Taiwan. So we worked out this arrangement where we said that, under certain circumstances, we would reserve the right to defend Taiwan if necessary. And you're pointing out that it sounds contradictory because we're saying there's a one China policy. And I think you're correct that it does sound somewhat contradictory.
Does Taiwan matter anymore to us?
We certainly think that it does. There's no question about that. The United States is committed to defending Taiwan. You want to remember that Joe Biden said 4 separate times that the United States would defend Taiwan if China attacked. And maybe the Trump administration will abandon that commitment, but I would actually be very surprised because I think, if anything, Trump would like to focus on containing China, and he would like to get out of the Middle East and out of Ukraine as much as possible. So I don't see him, deviating much from Biden's policy.
Are we in a position to fight a war against mainland China over Taiwan?
we're not in a very good position, that's for sure. And that's in large part due to the fact that we have not spent that much time thinking about containing China. And we've instead focused on the Middle East and focused on Ukraine. You know, I think if a war were to break out, it would not result in a quick and decisive American victory by any means. I think, you know, we would be in deep trouble very quickly. But the good news is that the Chinese would be in deep trouble as well. I see no reason that the Chinese will invade Taiwan anytime soon. So I think that the situation with regard to Taiwan, and I underline the word thing, I think the situation with regard to Taiwan at this point is quite stable. So I don't think we're going to find out just how well prepared the United States is to fight a war over Taiwan. And I want to be clear, I think that's all for the good.
Okay. Chris reminds me this will not go well for President Trump, who is a stickler for being on time. Prime Minister Netanyahu is not there yet at the White House. And President Trump was aware of the fact that Netanyahu was not there, is still interacting with the press in the Oval Office. Professor Mearsheimer, it's a pleasure, my dear friend. I know you have a major speech in, of all places, Skokie, Illinois. I wish you well.
Snap.com and tell them the judge sent you.
Colonel McGregor, welcome here, my dear friend. I want to go right to what will soon be happening as we are on air, and that is the meeting between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What does Netanyahu want from President Trump?
Oh, that's a great question. I think what President Netanyahu wants is a guarantee of continued delivery of all the ordnance and military equipment that he needs, whether it comes in the form of F-35 jets or missiles, rockets, anything. And I think he will certainly get that. As you know, President Trump has just announced $1 billion worth of equipment on its way to Israel. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think there'll be a discussion about what's happening in the region. And that's going to be difficult because President Trump is not comfortable with what's happening in Gaza. Remember, he said, I want you to get it over with. Now, you and I regard that as a rather callous remark, given that we're talking about the lives and property of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Well, that hasn't happened. And what he's gotten is instead a truce. And I think there'll be some discussion about pressing ahead to, quote unquote, finish the job in Gaza, whatever that means. And then there's the second part of this. But what are we going to do to help the Israelis secure their northern border now with Syria? They've moved into Syria. They want to retain territory in southern Syria. Are we going to stand by that and allow them to acquire that and keep it? And that puts us at odds potentially with the Turks. Then the other issue is the Kurdish problem in Syria. There are large numbers of Kurds, thousands that are ready to fight against the Turks if the Turks decide to remove them. There's a lot of evidence that that's actually beginning now. Are we going to pull all our forces out or not? You'll recall that in the past, President Trump has said, I want those forces out, and then ultimately he backed down.
Right.
I think that will come up again for discussion. And then, of course, there's the Iranian issue. The worst thing that could happen for Mr. Netanyahu is for President Trump to strike a quote unquote deal with Iran that leaves Iran, in a position to build a nuclear weapon. He doesn't want that. He wants absolute certainty that there is no potential capability for that at all. That may be difficult for President Trump to deliver.
Do you believe from any of your sources that President Trump will tell Prime Minister Netanyahu this afternoon, or will announce publicly soon, the intention of the United States to open up an embassy in Tehran? And if that is so, wouldn't that be a significant setback for Netanyahu?
Well, that rumor was presented to me, and several of us here at OCOC tracked that down. That appears to have originated with Brett Baer, who was in Mar-a-Lago, I guess, may have been in Washington, and overheard this mentioned. Whether or not it was something that President Trump said or someone else, who knows? I would be very careful not to rush to assume that. Now, if, as you say, he emerges from the meeting and announces that, then that would suggest that he's made it clear to Mr. Netanyahu that regardless of what Netanyahu wants, we are going to open a new chapter in our relationship with Iran. I would welcome that, as I'm sure you would, because I certainly don't want to see a war between Iran and Israel or anybody else over there. But I wouldn't bet on it yet.
So Brett Baer often plays golf with President Trump, and there's a third person who plays golf with them. We'll know who this is in a heartbeat. Chris, cut number 11.
So what this resolution does, it lays out the case against Iran's nuclear ambition. Bibi and the Israelis are going to have to make a decision relatively soon what to do about the Iran nuclear program. This is not an authorization to use force, but I'm here to tell you and the audience and the world that I think America should support an effort by Israel if they decide to decimate the Iranian nuclear program, because I think it's a threat to mankind. Israel is strong, Iran is weak. Hezbollah, Hamas have been decimated. They're not finished off, but they've been weakened. And there's an opportunity to hit the Iran nuclear program in a fashion I haven't seen in decades.
Israel is strong, Iran is weak, Hezbollah and Hamas have been decimated. Where's he coming from?
He sounds like the commander in the Crimea in 1854, urging the Light Brigade to charge up the hill against the Russian artillery. We know how that turned out. It wasn't a success story. He is, in my judgment, for President Trump's purposes, the voice from hell. And if President Trump continues to invite him into his inner circle, he's making a very serious mistake. But I think that Lindsey Graham and Mr. Netanyahu are unambiguously on the same page. I think they both want that war desperately, and they want us to be in it. And they think that they can be successful early on with the right kinds of strikes. We've heard that sort of thing so many times in the past, going back decades. It doesn't make any difference. Once you open the door to a war like that, it has a bad habit of running in all sorts of directions you never anticipated, which is why I and many others would prefer no war at all, Judge.
Colonel, do you believe that Donald Trump is a man of peace and will not start a war, whether it's to please Netanyahu or Lindsey Graham or anybody?
I think Donald Trump is someone who doesn't want a war. I've said that from the beginning. His instincts tell him wars are not good for presidents. But people can be talked into things, and he is someone who can be talked into things. It's not his forte. He's much more comfortable talking about business and economics and so forth. He's also got all of these donors standing behind him who have poured tens of millions of dollars into his campaign to get him elected. And they too want war with Iran. So I think it's a very difficult position that he's in. I wouldn't second guess him at this stage, but I would not exclude the possibility that he falls for the argument. We can do this. We'll do it quickly. It'll be over in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I mean, that's something that General Wes Clark told Bill Clinton when he was president about the Kosovo Air campaign. And President Clinton said, "How long do you think this will last?" And he said, "Well, 3 or 4 days, 2 weeks at the most." Very hazardous statement to make. Wars are not predictable things.
Right.
So I think you've got a similar situation here. It depends on how much trust and confidence the president has in either Netanyahu or Lindsey Graham or Mr. Waltz, his national security advisor, who is also an Iran war advocate. So I wouldn't be surprised. I doubt seriously that Mr. Hegseth would push back against this. He's also another Iran war advocate.
Do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu intends to comply with the second phase of the so-called ceasefire, a ceasefire, the copies of which he has locked in his safe so the public can't see it, given how much pressure he's under to resume the war or perhaps lose his majority in the Knesset?
No, I don't put any trust in the subsequent versions or phases of this thing. I think he's going to stick with the first one. It's in his interest to do so, gives his forces a break to rest, refit for the next phase. And that's what he's going to do. He's going to rely primarily, once again, on the hundreds of aircraft that he's got, the Air Force, to do serious damage to any number of different enemies. But he's not going to follow through on the rest of it. And I don't think anybody on the other side of these matters, whether they're in Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Hezbollah, anywhere else, Syria, no one believes that. So, no, I don't think so.
What did Netanyahu accomplish by his 15 months of genocide?
Well, that depends on who you talk to. There are lots of Israelis who believe that he has systematically destroyed the Palestinian position and any hope of a Palestinian state. That was the goal, one of the goals. The underlying purpose, though, was to drive everybody out of Gaza. Well, that hasn't quite worked. And Hamas is by no means destroyed any more than Hezbollah is. But he may think that he's bought more time for Israel to renew the fight and go back and finish the job, which is why he wants all of those 2,000-pound bombs and all the other munitions he can get his hands on.
Finish the job. The place is totally demolished. At least 60,000 people, maybe as many as 200,000 are dead. Netanyahu wants to continue, and Trump's going to finance it.
Yes, that's it.
Let me switch gears, Colonel. Is the Biden pipeline to Kyiv still flowing?
It would appear so. You know, I've made some phone calls, talked to people, and it looks like the military equipment that was already there, ready for shipment into Ukraine, is being moved into Ukraine. So whatever suspension of aid was involved, that seems to have been an end.
How does Trump end the war if he's going to continue to fund this regime, which you and others have told us, you know, it's on its last legs?
Well, you know, Prime Minister Salisbury, most people don't remember him, but he was the Prime Minister of the British Empire around 1900 when Britain was the preeminent power in the world. And he used to say the most grievous error in politics is clinging tenaciously to the carcass of dead policies. You know, I was hoping that President Trump would realize that the policy in Ukraine is dead. I would argue that the policy in the Middle East is also dead, but immediately end what's happening in Ukraine, get out of it. But instead of that, he seems to have decided to extend it, perhaps because he thinks he can extract some goodness from it. After all, he's arguing that in return for rare earths, we would provide more military aid. Well, I don't know who the military aid will go to. I mean, there are 1.2 to 1.5 million dead Ukrainians. They can't replenish the ranks. There are no substitutes. The state of Ukraine is effectively destroyed. So where is he going to get the people to operate the equipment he gets? I think it's ridiculous, but apparently that's President Trump's idea that if he could extract rare earths from them, that would be a benefit. The problem is the rare earths are all in the areas that are populated with Russians, and the Russians currently control them. So you're not going to get any rare earths out of that.
Here he is just a couple of minutes ago in the Oval Office talking about what he wants to extract from the earth.
Ukraine, they have very valuable rare earth. We want what we put up to go in terms of a guarantee. We want a guarantee. We're handing them money hand over fist. We're giving them equipment. European is not keeping up with us. They should equalize. And look, we have an ocean in between. They don't. It's more important for them than it is for us.
Sounds like it's the businessman in him. We'll keep giving you arms, but this is what we want when the war is over. I guess he doesn't realize what you just said. which is
Well,
that the
let's
treasure trove of this stuff is under Russian control, and they're not going to give it up.
There's $7.8 trillion supposedly worth of rare earths. They are all under Russian control in eastern Ukraine, which is Russian.
Well, what is it, Colonel? We're saying rare earth. What is it?
Oh, that's everything from graphene to beryllium to lithium, any number of different things. In fact, there's a major lithium mine also in that area of eastern Ukraine. There were always coal mines there. And coal mines, in the seams of the coal mines, you get rare earths, by the way. We've got that here in the United States. Been a big source of frustration for me that we're not maximizing our focus on that. But having said that, the only thing worth having in Western Ukraine, where there are no rare earth deposits, as far as I know, or anything else, that is the black earth, the rich agricultural land. Well, here's an interesting flash. Cargill, DuPont, and Monsanto already have bought up the rights to most of the land in Western Ukraine. So I don't know how he handles that, but this is part of Mr. Zelensky's effort to sustain himself and his regime in power by selling off assets. But the rare earths in particular, forget it, President Trump, you're never going to see them.
General Kellogg surprised me the other day when he called for a ceasefire and elections, 2 elections in 2025, parliamentary elections and presidential elections. And of course, this was rejected by President Zelensky. Why would he want to expose himself to the wrath of the public that he has helped to destroy? Is this part of Trump's policy?
When we say policy, I think we have to go back to basics and look at the assumptions. There is an assumption in the Trump administration that Ukraine is a viable state. It is not. There is an assumption that the Ukrainian military, with additional aid, can recover and continue to fight. That is untrue. There is an assumption in the Trump administration that they can overcome the corruption that riddles the country by extracting some benefit from rare earths. That's not going to happen. The 7.8 trillion of those are in the eastern part of Ukraine under the Russians. And there's this other underlying assumption: Russia's bad. Russia's the enemy. President Trump knows better than that. These people are not the enemy of us. They're not the enemy of Western Europe or Eastern Europe. There's no interest in going to war with us. And he should step forward and make that clear. But for some reason, he's decided to stay on point. That's why I said the clinging to this carcass of dead policy is a serious mistake. If he doesn't get out of this and distance himself from the folly and stupidity of his predecessors, it could well drag him into the pit.
Here's President Zelensky on Sunday, Colonel, so just 2 days ago. It almost sounds as though he's claiming that money from the U.S. has been stolen, not by his people, but by the Americans. Take a listen, cut number 12.
When they say that Ukraine, during the war, received $200 billion to support the army, etc., that's not true.
He definitely did, man.
I don't know where all this money is.
What was your reaction to the freeze in U.S. Foreign aid to organizations that included those in Ukraine? And are you concerned that this might be followed by a potential freeze in military aid?
Look, as the president of a warring country, I tell you, we received just over $75 billion. That is 100 billion of these 177 billion, or 200 billion, some people even say, we have never received. And this is important. Because we are talking about specific things. Because we got it not with money, but with weapons. We got 70 billion something worth of it.
I don't know. Can you figure out what he's saying? It's almost as if he's complaining. He, the head of the most corrupt government and the most corrupt society in Europe, complaining that they didn't get all the money that was promised and therefore somebody else did.
Well, I think it's useful to point out that as far as we can tell, he receives, this is the president of Ukraine in the form of Zelensky, $11 million a month. That's his salary. So we can certainly point to waste, fraud, and abuse there.
11 million a month?
Yes. That's what the Russian and actually the Ukrainian press, it's out there, $11 million a month. And then on top of that, we could point to his real estate holdings. They're worth tens of millions, and we don't even know with certainty which banks hold enormous quantities of cash. So I would say that he is probably the chief thief in Ukraine. Now, he would probably argue that he's not, that he's had to pay off oligarchs who backed him. That may be true. But the real point is we've sent a lot of money over there. We know that a lot of it was essentially put into this laundering machine in Washington, D.C. that allows us to ship equipment and pay for it right here in Washington. But the equipment goes to Ukraine, but cash, not so much. But we've still sent enough cash in terms of hundreds of millions from time to time that he's being able to pay off his government. Everybody in the parliament is richly rewarded for their support. And of course, the officers in command of Ukrainian troops are earning vast sums of money. It is one giant scam. It makes Bernie Madoff look like a patriot in the United States compared to this man. The mountain of lies is collapsing, Judge. This is the beginning of the end, and all of this is going to come out in a big way.
So how does this end? The Russians won't negotiate with him, rightly so. He doesn't have any legal authority to sign any agreement, and he's refusing to permit new elections. Does the U.S. just get rid of him?
Well, that depends. I think we could see something that looks a lot like our departure from Kabul, where he and others like him are packing as much cash and belongings as they can into private jets and cars and things, or railroad cars, and leaving as quickly as possible, headed west. That much I think we can say is going to happen. It's going to happen soon. The Russians right now have an enormous amount of military power concentrated in a couple of key places. One is across from Kiev, and the other is further south down near Kherson. They can move whenever they decide to move, and there's nothing the Ukrainians can do about it. We know that. If we continue to prevaricate and lie, as we have thus far, about the true state of affairs on the ground, they will eventually move. And there won't be anybody to sign anything because it won't be necessary. The entire Ukrainian state will have collapsed, and the Ukrainian population that remains is not going to put up a fight at this stage because they've had enough. So you'll end up with the Russians in charge, period. And we will have thrown away any opportunity we might have ever had to help shape some sort of outcome that would have been remotely beneficial to Europe or the Ukrainians.
This will probably take us back to Israel and Gaza. But what is your comfort level, Colonel, with the super rich, some would call them oligarchs, with which President Trump has surrounded himself? For example, this fellow, Howard Lutnick, and the other fellow, Steve Witkoff, do they have, as far as you know or understand, an economic interest in the outcome of the deals they're negotiating purportedly on behalf of the U.S.?
Well, I think we can say with some degree of certainty that they certainly do. I mean, these are people that manage to acquire billions of dollars of wealth. You can debate how that happens. We have to understand that our economy is completely financialized. Someone said to me the other day, Doug, we don't have an economy at all. We have a financial system that owns the economy. I think that's a good way to look at it. These gentlemen that you mentioned are part of that development, that structure of power. I'd be surprised if it were not the case. And I read something, and then I watched briefly Alex Kreiner, who is a very fine financial analyst. He's somebody that you should consider bringing on to look at this from a political standpoint. But he pointed out that obviously the government in London is going to fall because the British economy is moribund and the financial system is going to crash. Now, one of the symptoms of this has been the London Metals Exchange, where the Bank of England is suspiciously may not have the gold in its vaults that it's supposed to have. Now, what gold is there is being extracted by investors in the United States. Apparently, they seem to want to get out before there is a quote unquote margin call and the true dimensions of the scam are revealed. At the same time, you have an interest in the United States with people like Mr. Lutnick, who are connected to the City of London banking system, the people over there, to backstop the losses in order to prevent a wholesale collapse of the financial system in London. And it is rumored, and this is where Kreiner comes in, and he knows more about this than I do, but he suggested they're actually talking about using U.S. treasuries in a sense to backstop by essentially putting them up for sale in an exchange in London. Now, this is something we've never done before. At least I can't find any evidence for it. We've always sold.
I never heard of it.
Yeah. So this is somebody said to me, well, look, you got a lemonade stand and there's another lemonade stand that's out of lemonade. So you go over to them and you pour some lemonade into them to keep them going. But the problem is there's nothing behind it. And I think that's where we're headed in England. No matter how hard people try to rig the system, which is really what we're talking about when we talk about putting treasuries into the pool of assets on which the banks depend for solvency and effectiveness, that's pretty much the end. So you're talking about a system that's doomed. The objection to it would be, I suspect, in the United States from investors, well, when that falls apart and the government goes down and the bank collapses, what happened to our assets? They're gone. In other words, why should we put ourselves at risk? Because then we'll end up in the same position. It's a very fishy set of circumstances. It's something that most of us never look at because, frankly, that's not where we're focused. But this is something that deserves a lot of attention in the financial markets, and it deserves attention from Americans who care about the United States.
And we don't know if Donald Trump understands this, if he's dumb like a fox, or if he truly doesn't understand it and is being taken advantage of by the people around him.
I think he's someone who's grown up in New York and expects that the people that surround him will take profits as they can to enrich themselves, and probably doesn't see anything wrong in that. But more important, he may not really understand the fragility of the situation in London. You know, when Truss was removed as prime minister, she came in gangbusters with a plan to do everything that Margaret Thatcher had done. It was made very clear to her, we can't raise taxes, we can't cut taxes. We don't have the funds. We don't have anything that you want to do. And so she lasted for a few months. It was gone. I think that's where Starmer is right now. Only his position is far worse. He's talking about shipping billions of pounds to Ukraine, which is absurd since Ukraine is a bottomless pit with nobody in it anymore. But more important, they don't have it to send. And when this Bank of England goes under, there's going to be chaos, and that's going to have an impact on the continent. It's going to have an impact here in the United States. I think we're going to see a ripple effect. I don't know what the president knows.
I want to get back to where we started earlier, and I apologize for asking you a question I've asked you many times before, but events seem to be moving so quickly now. Is the United States still close to a war?
I think right now with President Trump in the White House, he is unwilling to commit forces in direct combat against the Russians, and for that matter, the Chinese. I noted recently that the website for Taiwan in the State Department had suddenly changed radically. And there was a statement on the website that said, we reaffirm the one China policy. So I thought that was a dramatic departure from all the nonsense from his predecessors. That's something we should greet, because I can't conceive of anything dumber and more dangerous than a war with China, which would benefit nobody, least of all us. So I think that's an indication of where President Trump is thinking in Asia. I think he wants to avoid that with Russia, but the real key at this stage of the game is what he does in the Middle East with Mr. Netanyahu. I would say there are three things that are driving everything. President Putin in Russia, he's clearly in control. He's won the war. He holds the strategic high ground. Then there's Mr. Netanyahu, who for various reasons has control of us, our military power, our strategic interests in the region. And then finally, it's the border and the potential for the border to really explode into all-out war, which I think is coming.
Do you
So
read
those are
anything? Do you read anything into the fact that the Secretary of State is not part of the meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump?
Not really. It may be because that's President Trump's preference. President Trump points out routinely when you ask him, I'm the man who makes all the decisions.
Colonel McGregor, thank you, my dear friend. I know we're all over the place, but it's a pleasure to be able to pick your brain, and deeply grateful.
Over the past 30 days, the offensive pace of the Russian army in all key areas of the front has increased significantly. The advance of Russian troops is being recorded in Kursk, Kharkiv, Pokrovsk, Korokovo, and even Zaporizhia directions of the front. In an attempt to save the situation, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, General Alexander Syrsky, better known as the Butcher, continues to throw unprepared forcibly mobilized Ukrainian soldiers into battle. As a result, over the past 30 days, the losses of the Ukrainian army in manpower have doubled. It is reported that from January to February 2025, the total losses of the Ukrainian army in all directions of the front amounted to 68,000 soldiers. So, a few hours ago, an officer of the Ukrainian army, Anton Cherny, harshly criticized the country's military and political leadership for the fact that the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, General Syrsky, on the orders of the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, continues to throw into battle forcibly mobilized soldiers who have not even received special military training. We all need to admit the terrible truth. The fact is that the Ukrainian General Staff has lost all its trained reserves. All these reserves were destroyed in key directions of the front. Now, the Ukrainian General Staff is throwing unprepared mobilized soldiers to the Pokrovsk direction of the front, which is the hottest and bloodiest. In this regard, the number of dead Ukrainian soldiers and deserters continues to grow rapidly. Due to cases of mass desertion of Ukrainian soldiers and officers, the Ukrainian army has already lost 5 of its brigades, Ukrainian officer Anton Cherny said. The United States also acknowledged the significant losses suffered by the Ukrainian army in terms of personnel. A few days ago, Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg, officially announced that the Ukrainian army had suffered significantly more casualties in this war than the United States did in Vietnam and Korea combined. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that many researchers estimate the US losses in Vietnam differently. According to conservative estimates, US losses in Vietnam amounted to 390,000 killed and 1 million wounded. However, Washington itself claims that the United States lost 58,000 killed and 184,000 wounded. Earlier, Donald Trump also touched on the topic of the Ukrainian army's heavy losses. According to him, the losses of the Ukrainian army in manpower have already amounted to 700,000 soldiers. At the same time, Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov gave completely different figures. According to him, as of February 2025, the Ukrainian army has lost more than 1 million soldiers. However, Zelensky himself, apparently under the influence of prohibited medication, continues to claim that the Ukrainian army allegedly lost about 38,000 soldiers in this war. Whatever it may be, facts are stubborn things. Unlike Ukraine, Russia continues to take control of strategically important cities and towns in the Special Military Operation Zone, even without forced mobilization. All this indicates that the Russian troops, even despite their stable offensive pace, are suffering much lower casualties in manpower than the Ukrainian army. According to official figures, as of February 2025, the total losses of the Russian army amounted to 91,000 soldiers. At the same time, it is worth considering the fact that in 3 years of fighting, the Russian army has never used its reserves. In simpler terms, unlike Ukraine, which has lost all its reserves and begun the forced mobilization of Ukrainian citizens, the Russian army's reserves are still not involved, and in full combat readiness, ready to enter battle as soon as the appropriate order is received. In addition, Russia still refuses to carry out mobilization. The Russian troops stationed in Ukraine consist exclusively of professionally trained and motivated contract soldiers. Against this backdrop, it becomes clear why Vladimir Putin is in a good mood, and quite confidently answers even the most provocative questions from Western journalists. Yes, the Russian army is steadily moving forward, taking control of dozens of strategically important settlements. Almost every day, war correspondents report on another settlement liberated by the Russian army. And this fact gives Putin powerful levers of pressure on the United States and Ukraine. All this indicates that this conflict will end precisely on Russia's terms, otherwise, the Russian army will continue its victorious offensive up to the border with Poland. Ukrainian army officers also confirmed that the Russian army does not intend to halt its offensive. In particular, on February 2nd, during an interview with American journalists from CNN, Ukrainian army officers stated that they do not believe that Donald Trump would be able to convince Putin to stop the current conflict through the negotiation process. According to them, Vladimir Putin does not need negotiations, because the Russian army is winning on the battlefield. At the same time, the Ukrainian officers added that if Donald Trump cannot convince Putin to stop the offensive of Russian troops, then by the fall of this year the Ukrainian army will completely collapse. According to them, the forced mobilization carried out in Ukraine does not cover the Ukrainian army's losses. Moreover, there are lack of motivation among mobilized soldiers. They don't want to fight. Many of them surrender or desert. The Russians are well aware of all the Ukrainian army's problems. Unfortunately, we are retreating. They will not agree to a ceasefire, and will continue to advance. Trump will not be able to stop Putin, the Ukrainian army officers stressed. The fact that Russia has no intention of stopping the offensive has also been confirmed by numerous Western think tanks. In particular, American experts from the Institute for the Study of War said that everything that happens on the battlefield indicates that Russia is preparing for long-term military operations aimed not only at the complete liberation of Donbass, but also at capturing the Dnipropetrovsk region. Currently, we are witnessing that the Russian army is preparing slow operational maneuvers on the battlefield to further advance deep into Ukrainian territory. All this indicates that Putin's military goals are of a long-term nature, and that the Russian leader is not going to enter into a negotiation process not only with Ukraine, but also with the United States, American experts said.
the media is going to have an absolute meltdown shortly because Donald Trump is making arrangements to meet with Putin. So media meltdown incoming. Watch out. Red alert, red alert. There is going to be absolute spasms happening all across the news media and also all across Congress as Trump sits down with Putin to make a deal to end the war in Ukraine. And of course, this is going to come out ultimately favorable to Putin. He's going to get what he wanted, which is the war is going to stop. There's going to be no NATO for Ukraine, and he's going to be able to keep a bunch of the land that he didn't have before. So in the end, Russia wins this war, and we just slaughtered a bunch of Ukrainians for no reason and took the resources from Ukraine for no reason for Ukraine. I mean, good for America, bad for Ukraine. And in the end, the outcome, what were all of these crazy lunatic leftists thinking? What were they thinking when they decided, oh, we've got to stop Putin and we'll do it at all costs, including the cost of 500,000 Ukrainian men? I mean, what in the world were they thinking? So the possible Trump summit is going to happen. Here's Reuters explaining it. Now they're trying to figure out a venue for this meeting. And some of the venues they're looking at: Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. This makes a lot of sense. The Middle East is close for, obviously, Russia. It doesn't take them long to get to the Middle East. The United States can meet in the Middle East as well with Russia. Russia's, Putin's banned from going. He has an arrest warrant, just like Netanyahu, for the International Criminal Court. And so Putin is limited on where he can go. Also, a lot of these European countries are not obviously friendly to Putin, quite hostile. So it makes sense to, China's not really an option for the United States to have this meeting. The United States is not on good terms with China, but the United States is on good terms with Saudi Arabia. So my guess is this meeting happens there, or the United Arab Emirates. Both countries pretty neutral for both of those locations are neutral for both countries. And so Putin and Trump are supposed to be having this meeting fairly soon. They're trying to make this happen sooner than later because Trump wants to see this war end. And I think this will be an absolute amazing thing. It'll be excellent for the Trump administration, for, another feather in his cap for sure to end the war in Russia, or the war in Ukraine. What's interesting, however, is, Trump has been eyeing Greenland, as you know. He's dead serious about this. He wants Greenland, and he wants to take it from Denmark. So Denmark, in their panic, has interestingly now allowed a Russian company to come in and actually repair the Nord Stream pipeline that was blown up, mysteriously blown up. Nobody knows who blew it up. The West tried to claim Russia blew up their own pipeline, but that doesn't make any sense now, does it, when you actually stop to think about it, especially in hindsight? Does that make sense to you if you believe that? Were you one of those people that believe that Russia blew up their own pipeline? Does that make sense to you today, now, in hindsight? So here's the story of Denmark. Now, Denmark is kind of putting this in a real soft way. They're saying, oh, no. We're not trying to restart the Nord Stream pipeline. We're not looking to turn it back on. We're just going to let the company come in and do some repairs to prevent further environmental damage. This is good for the environment. That's why we're doing it. Oh, really? Okay. So you didn't think to do that a year or two ago. You didn't think it was good for the environment a year or two ago. But now that Trump is threatening Greenland, and you realize you need to be looking at Denmark first, right? You need to be Denmark first. Europe should be Europe first. Every country should be their own country first, and they should be looking out for themselves, and they shouldn't be relying on alliances that come and go on a whim. And the United States is showing to Europe and Canada and Mexico and a lot of other places that our alliance is fragile. That an alliance is not, it's just an alliance. Alliances are temporary. That's not your own family. So Denmark has given the green light to preservation work on the damaged Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline in the Baltic Sea. A unit of Russia's Gazprom will carry out the work, not to immediately resume the pipeline, but to reduce environmental and safety risks, the Danish Energy Agency said. Who believes that? Or are they like, we're going to need to get some gas from Russia because the United States is about to tariff our ass and take Greenland on top of it. President Duda said that the gas pipeline should be dismantled. Now, President Duda is from Poland, and Poland is very against this pipeline. Once it dismantled, once it gone, wants it to never resume operation again. But the Europeans have been hesitant to actually dismantle the thing because they're like, well, yeah, maybe we kind of need it. Maybe we just want to keep this open just in case. We might want to turn it back on because we might need it. Because the only other place that Europe is going to be getting some natural gas is from where? The United States. And the U.S. is kind of acting like a big bully. And again, you never know. I mean, look, like you can only rely on yourself at the end of the day. You could try to do deals with others, but they can always turn on you the minute a bigger, better deal comes along. So why would Europe they shouldn't rely on Russia or the United States. I mean, they should diversify and rely on everybody. That way they're not screwed when when the pipeline blows up or another country decides to tariff them to the moon. I mean, you've got to have diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. I thought we were all taught that. So EU diplomats have said that they support the stance that they will not resume the pipeline. But again, they're not dismantling it. And now Denmark is saying, all right, come in and do some restoration work, but not because we're going to turn the thing back on. We don't want there to be some environmental damage. So just think about this. I mean, these countries went along with this ridiculous war. They funneled a ton of their money to Ukraine. They allowed the blowing up of their own pipeline. The United States with, I guess, Norway or who knows who, the U.S. for sure was involved in this. The West in general, we'll just say, blew up the pipeline. There they are. They sabotage themselves by blowing up the pipeline. They give all their money away to Ukraine. And what good has it done? Now Trump is going to meet with Putin. The war is going to end. Putin will have claimed more of Ukraine. Ukraine has lost hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million soldiers. And for what? And their resources get siphoned because they got to pay back all the money that we gave them so that we get to take their resources away from them. So what exactly did Ukraine gain from this? And what did Europe gain from this now that they have to tuck their tail between their legs and go back to Russia and say, okay, actually, we do want some of that gas that you were selling us for cheap. It's good for Europe. It's good for the Europeans. We want to rebuild relationships. And I mean, this is just, what a joke. This whole thing has been a total and complete joke. So we'll see. We'll see how that meeting goes, and we'll watch in these next 4 years. I can guarantee you by the time these 4 years are over, all of this posturing against Russia and all, it's all going to be gone in the rearview mirror, and everybody will wonder what the hell all of this was even about and why it was done. And who was the idiot? Who were all the idiots in charge that decided that they could lead the world into what? This was so great. Greatness. This was leading us to greatness. Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show. If you want to watch the full show,
Is to face mounting losses on the battlefield, President Trump has hinted that U.S. military aid comes at a cost, and that is access to Ukraine's vast deposits of rare earth elements. This next story explains how, with an estimated value exceeding $26 trillion, minerals from Ukraine are crucial for the global supply chain.
Ukrainian forces are falling back. Outgunned and outnumbered, they are losing ground in the east as Russian troops push forward. The battle for Pokrovsk is turning against them. Supply lines are under fire, fresh reinforcements are scarce, and Moscow is seizing the advantage. The war nears a breaking point, but now a new demand emerges from Kyiv's biggest backer, Washington. US President Donald Trump proposes a bargain: American military support in exchange for access to Ukraine's vast mineral wealth.
We're telling Ukraine they have very valuable rare earth. We want what we put up to go in terms of a guarantee. We want a guarantee. We're handing them money hand over fist. We're giving them equipment. European is not keeping up with us. They should equalize. And look, we have an ocean in between They don't. It's more important for them than it is for us. But they're way below us in terms of money, and they should be paying at least equal.
With a treasure trove of critical raw material worth over $26 trillion, Ukraine is one of the world's most valuable suppliers of metals essential for defense, technology, and green energy. To put that in perspective, the US economy is worth $30 trillion. Ukraine has rich reserves of lithium, titanium, beryllium, gallium, and uranium deposits. The global market for these minerals has doubled in 5 years, surpassing $320 billion, and is expected to double again soon. If the US secures control over Ukraine's resources, it could reduce its reliance on China, a dominant force in rare earth supplies. But at what cost to Ukraine? President Volodymyr Zelensky is seeking clarity on US aid and making a shocking claim that Ukraine received only $75 billion of the $177 billion US-approved aid.
Look, I as a president of a warring country tell you, we received more than $75 billion. That is $100 billion out of these $177 billion, or even $200 billion as some people estimate, we never received. And this is important because we talk about specific things, because we did not get it with money. We got it in weapons.
As the front line crumbles, Kyiv faces a harsh reality. Will it agree to Trump's terms, risking economic sovereignty, or refuse and see military aid diminish? With Russian forces advancing and time running out, Ukraine is being pushed into a dangerous corner. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Mr. John Rossomando is the president of Viking Research Associates, geostrategist and expert on U.S. national security. Mr.
Breaking news is coming right now from the city of Chasiv Yar. This is the Artemovsk direction of the front, where Russian airborne divisions from Ivanova and Kostroma are fighting. Russian infantry is methodically tightening the ring around the enemy's last fortified area in the south of this city. Today, our assault units have come close to the strategic mines Block 9 and Yugo-Vostokny. The enemy is trying to hold back the Russian offensive with artillery. However, the Russian Air Force does not leave the enemy militants any chance at all. American resources write about the extremely difficult situation for the Ukrainian army in this city, claiming that such intensity of fighting was not even in Bakhmut. Foolish faith in American military equipment has seriously let down the Nazis of the Kiev regime in the Pokrovsky direction. Today, another, probably one of Biden's last Abrams, burned there. But for understanding, only in January of this year, the Russian army liberated 325 square kilometers of land. Kiev is already raking up absolutely all the guys to the front. They are already starting to staff the Ukrainian army with mentally ill people. Now they are also recognized as fit for military service, and the procedure for passing the medical commission is just a formality. Kiev is also preparing to lower the draft age. Advisor to the former commander-in-chief of Ukraine Zaluzhny, Viktor Nazarov, believes that the age of mobilization should be lowered to 21. It is even better to prepare young people for war with Russia from kindergarten. Ukrainian so-called military expert Sergei Grabsky is convinced of this. It is not surprising that a hunt has begun for Ukrainian military commissars. In Poltavskaya Pyryatin, an employee of the Military Registration and Enlistment Office was shot dead, who was driving mobilized guys to a military unit. An unknown man in a gray balaclava approached the military commissar at a gas station and shot him point-blank with a hunting rifle. The attacker took the dead man's machine gun and fled the scene of the crime along with the mobilized men, who did not resist. And this is what the border with Transnistria in the Odessa region looks like now. To combat draft dodgers, a ditch was dug, a fence with barbed wire was built, and anti-tank fortifications were erected. And right now, a sensation from the American Reuters. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are allegedly key candidates for the Putin-Trump summit. The Kremlin does not officially comment on this information, but according to the agency, high-ranking Russian and American delegations have secretly flown to Riyadh and Abu Dhabi over the past week. Trump himself said at night that the weekend was tense, and he is already in dialogue with Kyiv and Moscow. And allegedly a meeting is already being prepared. And apparently, on the eve of the summit, a direct radical change has arisen in the rhetoric of official Washington. According to Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, Kellogg, the White House hopes that the presidential elections in Ukraine will take place before the end of 2025. Moreover, the Americans advised Zelensky to do this despite the martial law. We will assume that Trump thus heard Putin's position, who signaled to the West that Zelensky's legitimacy has rotted, and the parties will now negotiate without him. Zelensky himself said in another interview that Putin is simply afraid of him. Zelensky said that talking about Ukraine without Ukraine is dangerous. And the funniest thing here is that the Kyiv usurper said that he does not know where the $200 billion that Ukraine received from the United States are. Zelensky said that he saw only $75 billion. Well, that is, $125 billion were lost. It happens. We had a very busy weekend. We are dealing with Ukraine and Russia. We have meetings and negotiations scheduled with various parties, including Ukraine and Russia. I think these discussions are going quite well. Are we already losing the war to Russia and Ukraine? The front is moving in the wrong direction. Our task is to make sure that the Russians never achieve their goals. So no, Ukraine is not losing, and we must support them in achieving a position of strength. Is peace with the Russians possible in the future? Are negotiations with Putin already underway? Let's not be naive about Putin. If a peace agreement is reached, it must be sustainable. We must ensure that he can never again conquer even 1 square kilometer of Ukraine. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are being considered by Russia as possible venues for a summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. 2 Russian sources, familiar with the discussions, reported this to Reuters. Trump has previously said he intends to end the military conflict in Ukraine as soon as possible and is willing to meet with Putin. Russian officials have repeatedly denied having direct contacts with the United States to prepare for a phone call between Trump and Putin that would precede a possible meeting later this year. However, senior Russian officials have visited Saudi Arabia and the UAE in recent weeks. According to senior Russian officials, one of the sources noted that there is some disagreement in Russia about the idea, with some diplomats and intelligence officials pointing to Saudi Arabia and the UAE's close military and intelligence ties with the United States. Now there is good news for us, but unpleasant for Kyiv and other grant recipients. Trump closed USAID, the name of the International Development Agency. Elon Musk said this, emphasizing that this organization is not a wormy apple, but a whole ball of worms. Nothing is left of the apple. In addition, Musk directly called USAID employees criminals, radical Marxists. It is unclear what Marxists who hate America have to do with it. According to Elon Musk, who heads the U.S. Government Effectiveness Department, last year alone USAID spent $40 billion on Ukraine, and this is simply insane. Almost $23 billion, according to the organization's reports, went to help the Ukrainian government and pay its civil servants. In addition, Elon Musk declassified internal official documents of this organization, guidelines for the media, which USAID paid, which received grants. So, the fighters for freedom of speech and publicity were ordered in plain text, black and white, to carry out, quote, strategic silence on certain topics. Turns out that this is the essence of independent media, to hush up topics that are inconvenient for the masters. Robert Kennedy Jr. said that USAID was actually a front for the CIA. $5 billion was secretly funneled through this agency back in 2014, which was intended to foment unrest in Ukraine. In just half a century, the CIA has overthrown 83 governments around the world. In the meantime, USAID has already begun layoffs, not only of ordinary employees, but also of bosses, and they even sent security guards on leave until further notice. Democrats say that these decisions undermine national security. We are moving right now to the area of the special operation. Our war correspondent Alexander Rogakin is on the line. Alexander is the only correspondent who visited that very Velika Novosayolka after its liberation. The report is excellent. Sasha, what is happening there now? Why is it important that Novosayolka is ours? Hello, Olga. Hello, Yevgeny. What is Velika Novosayolka? With its liberation, first of all, as I believe, the Ugledar offensive operation, which was carried out by the Russian group east in the southwest of the Donetsk People's Republic, is victoriously completed. And during this operation, we liberated almost 40 settlements. First of all, this is the city of Ugledar itself, and this same Velika Novosayolka, which is approximately 5 times larger than Ugledar in area. It was a large logistical defensive center of the armed forces of Ukraine. Many roads converged there. And it kind of crowned this famous Vermevsky salient, from which in 2023 the famous counteroffensive of Ukraine began, the goal of which was to cut the land bridge to Crimea. And, in fact, for the armed forces of Ukraine, this counteroffensive there ended very sadly. And now, when they lost Velika Novosayolka, and they lost it in literally 5 days, everything turned out very, very sad for them there. Because 2 cauldrons formed there, they had to literally swim across the rivers. They swam even in bulletproof vests, so they drowned. In general, it was such a big tragedy for them. Literally 3 battalions died there. In general, it's true. And for the Russian army, thank God, everything was going very well. The preparatory operation to take this city lasted about 2 months. We bypassed this city from 3 sides, gradually taking the heights, cutting off roads, cutting off the enemy garrison from supplies, and gradually we managed to completely encircle this city. There was not even a road left there. There was only a path across the river, actually, across, which the last few Ukrainian military units were forced to escape by swimming. And we captured the last large stronghold in the southwest of the Donetsk People's Republic. And, in principle, roads to Zaporizhzhia and Dnepropetrovsk are already opening there. Well, another thing is that quite powerful fortified areas have indeed been created there over the years, and, in principle, it will probably be quite difficult for us there too.
What's up, guys? Dabu 7 back at you. We got a lot going on, and it looks like, by all accounts, some things we talked about a decade ago pertaining to Jade Helm, they're in full swing operation. Jade Helm is live. Everything that it focused on, the whole border operation on states from California all the way down to Texas. It included Florida and other areas. And what were they doing? They were targeting going into areas where people live to get people. Now, we didn't have the whole immigration crisis on our hands back then the way that we do now. Now you can hopefully see that Homeland strike teams going all across the place, coupled with the U.S. military being rolled out all across the border in that whole region. This is the operation. This is the massive operation that they drilled for. And they're doing just that. They're rounding people up. They're putting them in camps, stuff that people said would be a conspiracy theory. But that's because they were looking at it from the angle that they were going to be rounding up Americans and sticking them in there, and they didn't have any justification behind that. But that the drilling was real. They did Jade Helm. It was real through and through. And they trained for this exact event all along the border for what's about to pop off full scale. The military's mounting up there right now. And they're now flying these recon flights all the way down to Cabo San Lucas and different areas. And they're preparing to strike. So everything that was drilled and talked about back with Jade Helm is in full-scale swing at this point. Again, what people missed back then is they were equating Americans to be rounded up in this whole thing and put into camps or whatnot. But the reality is they were not seeing what was to come. We were in the beginning stages of Obama tearing down the border back then at that point. You fast forward to now, the whole installation of the Biden regime was to accomplish all these things. And they did it. Okay. So now on the back end, that is the excuse for strike teams to go out. Right. And they're doing things. They're out there rounding people up. They're getting criminals. They're getting murderers. They're doing all that. Right. When it comes to the military striking the cartels, I'm telling you, there's going to be major blowback. You've seen this at the beginning of the year. They showed this, what was to come. There's going to be more of it, no doubt, with the bombings, car bombing, and all that. There's going to be more things like that. Now they're lining up to strike inside of Mexico. They're going to be conducting military strikes on our neighboring country into it with Apaches, drones, everything you can think of. This is a military operation. And everything they trained for in Jade Helm. So it's on right now. And I got to say this. This all gives the perfect front for if bird flu or something crazy was to be launched. And it is 2025 when Bill Gates said the next one would launch. What would these strike teams be used for then? I think you already know the answer to that. Do you see where all this can go real quick? Turn of events? I hope you're paying attention.
We are going to be looking at some disturbing videos, strange and odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. Hold up. I did not want to go down this rabbit hole because when it comes to the plane crash in Washington, D.C., when it comes to the plane crash in Philadelphia, there are other things that I do want to talk about instead of connecting the dots to the Super Bowl. But with this most recent news, I have to go down this rabbit hole. Now, if you do not know what rabbit hole I'm talking about the rabbit hole where people are connecting the dots between the plane crash in Washington, D.C. and the Super Bowl, because there are some eerie connections, or some eerie quote-unquote coincidences, I should say. This video by Charlie Rose on TikTok does a great breakdown of the theory.
Here is exactly how the Washington, D.C. American Airlines plane crash relates directly to the Super Bowl. So you're telling me American Eagle flight en route from Kansas to Washington, D.C. was involved in an accident at the DCA. American Eagle flight 5342 coming from Wichita, Kansas. Both teams coincidentally going to the Super Bowl. Oh yeah, and what just happened last Sunday? The Philadelphia Eagles beat the Washington Commanders. Oh, and just look at this. The Philadelphia Eagles official Twitter page posted a helicopter saying just drop down to say go Birds. On the same day of Kobe Bryant's death 5 years ago, who died in a helicopter crash. As much as I don't care about football anymore anyways, because I know it's just a bunch of grown men running around in suits, I will not be watching the Super Bowl this year.
Now, like I said, I really didn't want to go down this rabbit hole, but why am I doing so now? Well, news has come out that among the victims in the DC plane crash, one of them was a Kansas City Chiefs super fan. And I'm thinking to myself, where have I heard this before? Where have I heard the story of Kansas City Chiefs fans losing their lives in very bizarre ways? Then I remember that very bizarre story that came out where 3 men passed away in their friend's backyard. They froze, and the story was very strange and bizarre. News and media kept referring to these 3 men as the Kansas City Chiefs fans. I even made videos on this story where I said, why does news and media keep referring to these 3 men as the Kansas City Chiefs fans? This story had broke out on January of 2024, right before the Chiefs played in the Super Bowl. Now we have another strange story, and this Washington, D.C. plane crash is indeed a very strange and mysterious story, where once again we hear that a Kansas City Chiefs fan, a super fan this time, has lost their life right before the Kansas City Chiefs play in the Super Bowl. But even outside of that, there are a lot of, again, quote-unquote coincidences that play in this story and the Super Bowl, like the plane coming from Kansas and somebody on the plane being a Kansas City Chiefs super fan, and then, you know, this very bizarre tweet by the Philadelphia Eagles, which shows somebody coming down from a helicopter saying, just drop down to say go Birds. And there are other coincidences, quote-unquote coincidences, that people are making, like, you know, the very next plane crash that happened a day later taking place in Philadelphia. But going back to the 3 men who passed away in their friend's backyard last year, there were a lot of people saying how that was a sacrifice, a ritualistic sacrifice. What is eerie is that the 2024 Super Bowl between the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs had a big connection with the number 3. Reading this article here from Larry Brown Sports even states how the number 3 appeared quite often in that Super Bowl. They have this article that is titled, "Fans Obsessed Over All the Number 3s in the Super Bowl." The article goes on to say that there were some major coincidences regarding the prevalence of the number 3 when it came to Super Bowl 58 on Sunday, and some fans took note. Some even thought something big was going on with numerology. The final score for the Super Bowl was 25-22. The Kansas City Chiefs fans beat the San Francisco 49ers by 3 points. Let us also not forget that during halftime, the San Francisco 49ers were leading the Kansas City Chiefs by 3 points. The final touchdown from Patrick Mahomes to Mecole Hardman to win the game was a 3-yard pass. The winning touchdown was scored with 3 seconds left on the clock. Patrick Mahomes' final passing yards total was 333. The title gave Mahomes 3 Super Bowls and 3 Super Bowl MVP awards. The game took place at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, where the stadium's address is 3333 Al Davis Way. Then news also came out right before the Super Bowl that Patrick Mahomes' father was arrested for his 3rd DUI. So there was really something going on with the number 3. And if you want to dig in deeper, Taylor Swift's favorite number is said to have been 13. This was Super Bowl 58, 5 plus 8 is 13. Then you flash forward to today with the plane crash. The plane crash happened on runway 33. The plane was told to go last minute to runway 33. There were 67 victims. 6 plus 7 is 13. Now, I know some people out there will say that this is just a stretch. This is just a reach. That can't be helped. Some people will believe what they want to believe. Some people will never see the strangeness in anything. But, looking at everything as a whole, this is really strange. Now, I mean, if you want to take apart one or two things and say that, oh, that's just a stretch or that's just a reach, or that's just a quote unquote coincidence. But again, you have to look at everything as a whole. How many were said to be on the Black Hawk? 3, which I guess that, isn't really a big deal because that's how many people normally, I think, are on a Black Hawk when training is being conducted. But still, it's just another example of the number 3, 33, and so forth popping up again. With all this going on, people are now saying that something may go down at this year's Super Bowl. Let's not also forget that something went down at the Kansas City Chiefs parade after the Super Bowl with that shooting. And now, people are saying all eyes on this year's Super Bowl because something may happen. And the Super Bowl is taking place in New Orleans. The very first day of January 2025, we had a horrible event taking place in New Orleans. Now, I'm not the type of person to say that such and such is going to happen on a specific date or date drop and things like that. I did do so when it came to the solar eclipse, but I said so in a more ritualistic light. I did say that we were not going to see chaos, explosions, and so forth, but it'll be more of a ritual. And who knows? Something like that might take place during this year's Super Bowl. This year's Super Bowl could be another big ritualistic event because this is weird. I'm sorry. This is very, very weird. Like there was news that came out yesterday where the Super Bowl will have a commercial featuring Meta Ray-Ban glasses. And the person that caused the horrible incident in New Orleans, well, news came out that he was wearing Meta Ray-Ban glasses. Again, I don't know. I'm not saying that something will indeed happen at this year's Super Bowl. I know they say don't live in fear, don't give into fear, and so forth. But the numerology and the quote unquote eerie coincidences between all this is just really off the charts. But all I'm saying is I just get a really bad feeling, a very eerie feeling. I'm getting the same eerie feeling that I got with the April 8th solar eclipse. And I know some people want to say that, well, nothing happened during the solar eclipse. And in my own opinion, that's wrong. I made plenty of videos showing how something did indeed go down. We just didn't see it with our own eyes. We are going to go ahead and look at another news story. And well, this is interesting. This is very interesting news that has come out about the DC plane crash. And it kind of plays into my community post that I made yesterday, where it seems like they want to stop us from speculating about the crash. Now, look, with all of these stories, not just with the DC plane crash, I'm talking about the Philadelphia crash with the audio, among other stories, we have to take these stories with a grain of salt. We have to be very cautious here. We don't know what's real, what's fake, and so forth. And I get it because people in the comment section of my videos are telling me these events might not even be real. They could be AI, they could be CGI, they could be distractions. And again, I get it, but there are certain things you cannot say on YouTube, especially when it comes to a big event, when there's a massive loss of life. You can't go down that rabbit hole on YouTube and say it's fake. That's something you would say for Humble. To make it clear, I'm not saying that these events did not happen. I'm not saying that. But if we were going to go down that rabbit hole and explore those theories, again, is something we would do on Humble, which I might make a video on Thursday. So if you're not subscribed to me on Humble, please feel free to do so. I will go ahead and leave my link to my page below. I know I haven't been uploading on there like I should be. I will start to do so. It's just that I do have a job outside of YouTube. I do work 8 to 10 hours a day. Luckily, I do work from home, so I get to balance everything, but it still takes a lot of my time. So yeah, any theories or truth that I can't talk about on YouTube, you will from now on start to see on my Humble page. But with that being said, we just had news come out, and I'm reading this article from the New York Post, which was published on February 3rd, and is titled, 2 Airport Authority Workers Arrested for Allegedly Leaking DC Plane Crash Video to CNN. And this is very, very interesting. And I do wonder which video footage they're talking about, because there's quite a few videos out there that show the crash. There's the one we're all familiar with, where the Black Hawk quickly crashes into the plane. But there's another video out there that's not really circulating in the news and media. It was shown to us by Fox News that really puts into perspective the distance between the Black Hawk and the plane. Is this video footage here where you can see the distance between the plane and the Black Hawk. And not only that, you can also hear about the survivors, but also people are saying that it looks like the plane is actually trying to get away from the copter.
Is a specialty.
So yeah, that video footage really puts into perspective the distance between the helicopter and the plane. And that video footage really isn't floating out there. But going back to the New York Post article, it says, 2 employees of the authority that manages the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport were arrested over their alleged involvement in leaking surveillance footage of last week's mid-air aircraft collision to CNN. The Metropolitan Washington Airport's authority staffers are accused of making an unauthorized copy of records and are facing charges of computer trespass, the agency said Monday. The legal trouble is tied to the chilling video obtained by CNN last week that offered a horrifying new vantage point in the crash over the Potomac River, ABC News reported. Looking into this a little bit further, CNN did publish an article about 4 days ago where they said that they obtained videos showing new angles of the DC plane crash. So I do believe they're talking about this video footage right here. Now, according to CNN, both the videos were recorded on cell phones. The MWAA said that Mohammed Bengay and Jonathan Savoy, both from Maryland, were both charged. Bengay was booked into Arlington County Adult Detention Center, but eventually released. Savoy, meanwhile, was issued a summons by the magistrate and cut loose. I still think that the most damning video footage out there is the video footage that shows the distance between the Black Hawk and the plane. But who knows what other video footage might be out there? Who knows what else was given to CNN that they refused to release or was told not to release? Because remember, that Fox News reporter said that there was other video footage out there, and the news agency, they cut him right off when he was saying that.
To see in real time what happened, but because this airport is so closely watched in DC, all the local TV stations have cameras on it. A lot of people also, I've seen dash cameras from Ubers and stuff like that. There have been multiple angles of this crash caught on camera. That, yes, will be a huge help to investigate.
Now, it is still my theory that people did indeed jump out the Black Hawk, landed into the waters, and they were rescued. Because, again, a local news team witnessed people being rescued and taken to the firehouse. Now, before anybody says that they got it wrong, they saw something else, because this local news team, they were actually lined up at the river as the rescue was happening. We have to remember, this is not the first time that news and media told us something and then they later changed the story. Remember back on July 13th, the Trump rally incident, news and media quickly came out and told us that police found the shooter's white van with Arizona license plates. They opened the van up. The police had jumped back as if they saw explosives or something. And they had actually shown the video footage of the white van being towed away by the police.
I couldn't tell yet, but okay, I'm gonna talk to him right now. I'm gonna bring him in. This is Billy Toma, Martha, who we've been talking to. We actually met him out there at the scene yesterday. He lives right near where this all happened at that rally. And you also recorded some video. As we see now, the suspect's van was parked right in your street, and they all kind of had it closed off, Martha, because they didn't want people from the rally to park on your street. So then you knew this guy's car wasn't supposed to be there. Walk me through what you saw.
So I came home a little bit before 5, saw it parked there. Didn't really think too much of it. It was the only spot in the whole yard or the whole road that wasn't blocked off. So later on in the night, everything happened and we got home and we were sitting there and saw cops all lined on the street. So whenever we looked out, we walked outside and saw them opening up his vehicle and everything. When the cop opened it, everybody else jumped back and was trying to stay out of the way. Here I am worried about it blowing up or whatever's going on. So,
I mean, to find out that this happens and the former president gets shot nearly right in the head, almost assassinated across the street from your house, and then to find out that the gunman's car was possibly parked right in front of your house. How many cops are we talking about that were out there surrounding this van? And was there a license plate on the back of that van?
There's probably 5 to 10 cars out there, and there was an Arizona plate on the van. And there was probably 15 cops.
Later, we would hear no more about this white van. There would be no more information, and we would find out that Thomas Matthew Crooks actually drove a white Hyundai Sonata. But this white van with Arizona license plates led us down a Maxwell Urich rabbit hole. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that something really indeed happened, but it was scrubbed altogether because it does not play into the narrative that they're trying to present. What's interesting, Maxwell Yerrick, his social media was completely scrubbed in real time. The pilot of the Black Hawk, the female pilot, her social media was also completely scrubbed. Supposedly, it came out there that the family did not want her identity to be revealed, which many people thought was very bizarre. And then 24 hours later, news and media start to release her identity after her Facebook, her Twitter, and so forth were completely scrubbed, deleted. They were not set to private. No, they were scrubbed. Everything on there was taken off. And her Twitter, I think, was also now deleted. So who really knows what's the truth, what's really floating out there? Because like we have seen before, things can be scrubbed and cleaned up just so it can play into the narrative. So it makes a lot of sense now with all the back and forth, with all the what seems like deception, where it seems like they're hiding something. It makes a lot of sense that we are getting articles coming from mainstream media, articles that are titled Plane Crash Conspiracies. And I'm a pilot's wife. Plane crash speculations are insensitive and disrespectful. They are trying to get on top of the narrative. We saw the exact same thing with the C-19. When things did not add up, things were not making sense, we started seeing articles. The C-19 conspiracies really hurt. It stops people from getting the help they need and so forth, until social media platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and so forth were deleting channels. They were giving bans. They were giving strikes. And I'm sure we're going to see the exact same thing here with these plane stories, because, again, nothing makes sense, but they do if you know. This is a very interesting video by Vibe Peasant, who goes in further about what they're hiding from us and why things are being hidden.
Welcome to The Rabbit Hole. Have you ever heard of feminism to the third power? This was posted December 19th, 2017. Are you a man? Do you notice anyone in this picture? This is Army Captain Rebecca Loback. Now, I know the media was very hesitant to release her name. They said it was due to her family's request. But check this out. Army withholds name of black helicopter crew in DC crash. 2 others identified. They had no problem identifying these 2 quick. It says here the 3rd crew member on the helicopter was a female pilot with 500 hours of flying experience. Okay, so this is where it gets really fishy for me, because they kept saying that the other 2 were pilots. Hold on a second. Who is pilot Ryan O'Hara, crew chief on Black Hawk? Former instructor of crew chief killed on Black Hawk in DC crash speaks. The only problem is Ryan O'Hara was never a pilot. O'Hara listed in the Army immediately after high school, starting as a mechanic before becoming a crew chief. Due to eye stigmatism, he was unable to pursue a career as a pilot. Why were they saying he was a pilot? This is Ryan O'Hara's information under the FFA. Notice how there's no medical information. He has to have a certificate. It's required to be a pilot. He was a mechanic. Now the other gentleman, Andrew Austin Reeves, he was a pilot. If you look here, he has his medical there. He has his certificate. He has all of his credentials here. So I went and looked up Rebecca Loback. I found this interesting. She has no medical information available. Isn't that interesting? Donald Trump said it was a DEI hire. We don't have information, that's for sure, but things are getting crazy. The FAA turned away 1,000 job applicants because of its DEI rules, despite staff shortages, lawsuit claims. Here it says the military aircraft was flying above 300 feet, which it's not supposed to. It's supposed to be at 200 feet to avoid commercial jets arriving at the Virginia airport, and it was at least a half a mile off course when it collided with an American Airlines flight. They said the family didn't want her name out there, but yet her name is out there now, and all of her social media has been scrubbed, even members of her family. So I started digging. She was a White House aide with Biden. That's her in the middle. I found this interesting as well. How many times can you hit the paper? March 29th, 2011, she was homeschooled, and she made the news. She was also there to walk Ralph Lauren when he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Joe Biden. Interesting. She's only 28 years old and she was a captain already. She was doing pretty good for herself. She owned a $567,000 home. But the crazy part about it, she didn't live there. The occupants were Virginia Field and Robert C. Vincent. But the other crazy part is Robert Vincent passed away on October 3rd, 2017. And if you ask Grok, all the info that Grok has on her was published after the crash. That's really interesting. Here are the publication dates. So what do we have here? When I checked out this photo, this says it's 71% AI generated, 29% chance that this picture is real. So I find it interesting that you can go back 50 years with Donald Trump and accusations against him, and Kavanaugh accusations against him, but we're not allowed to know anything about this woman. Everything was scrubbed. That should raise questions. And the fact that it wasn't put out there right off the bat, but yet they put the two other men out there. Now, I've never been a pilot, but it struck me as odd, and it seemed like 500 hours of flying experience was not that much, especially for someone who was named captain. She was the one flying the Black Hawk. That's what Grok said. She was the pilot in command. Check out what this pilot said about her 500 hours of flight time.
Now let's talk about the 500 hours briefly. 500 hours of flight time is so low, I wouldn't turn anybody loose in any of my airplanes at 500 hours with passengers for hire, or flying anywhere near a major airport, or anywhere else for that matter. I think, quite frankly, 500 hours is just barely adequate to get yourself up and back down safely. I really do. And the reason why I know that is because I was a 500-hour pilot at one time. And the time between when I got my pilot license and when I had my first major scare happens in that window, right? So somewhere between getting your pilot license and between 500 and 1,000 hours, something really sketchy is probably going to happen. Loose in any of briefly. 500 hours of flight time is so low, I wouldn't turn anybody loose in any of my airplanes at 500 hours with passengers for hire, or flying anywhere near a major airport, or anywhere else for that matter. I think, quite frankly, 500 hours is just barely adequate to get yourself up and back down safely. I really do. And the reason why I know that is because I was a 500-hour pilot at one time. And the time between when I got my pilot license and when I had my first major scare happens in that window, right? So somewhere between getting your pilot license and between 500 and 1,000 hours, something really sketchy is probably going to happen.
This is the pilot. So you're telling me 4 weeks ago, she's side by side with the president giving Medal of Freedoms. And then she's flying a Black Hawk helicopter 200 feet above and crashes into another plane.
So I wanted to update you guys on this whole helicopter and plane colliding in midair above protected military space in DC, which I talked about last week. I just haven't had the time to update you, but there's a lot going on. So we have more wreckage that's come out. There's arrests that have been made, as well as some very suspicious and weird things surrounding the person that supposedly piloted this helicopter. So let me get into it. It says DC plane crash wreckage pulled from Potomac. Photo shows chopper in watery grave. Authorities began pulling the wreckage of the doomed American Airlines flight 5342 from the Potomac River on Monday, as most of the bodies of the 67 people who died in the tragedy were recovered. Photos show the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers using a crane to lift one of the plane's massive turbines from the waves and deposit it on a flatbed barge near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport in D.C. It's just amazing. I've flown out of here probably 100 times in and out of here because I'm originally from D.C. This is insane. So there you go. You have some of the photos of it. And there we're seeing, you see the wreckage there. Hopefully you guys can see it pretty good. And it says the crane also hoisted the shattered pieces of a fuselage of the passenger jet, which slammed into an Army Black Hawk helicopter before crashing into the Potomac around 8:45 p.m. last Wednesday. And skipping through these ads, so you won't be able to see this part, but we're going to get into the arrest in a second. It says, in addition to the National Transportation Safety Board, showed the chopper lying in a shallow, watery grave as submerged parts of the doomed plane lay nearby. So this is just more photos, but I just want to give you context. The U.S. Army Corps said it is salvaging the jet first, a job that should take about 3 days. Officials have recovered bodies of 55 of the 67 people who died in the midair collision, but say they need to raise the jet's remains to retrieve the rest. Afterward, authorities will retrieve the fallen Black Hawk. The bodies of the 3 soldiers in the failed chopper have already been recovered. I just don't trust anything the government's reporting that they're doing or they picked up or that is on. I just don't trust it. Again, with us knowing that these Black Hawks now were given the capability just a few months ago to fly autonomously and remotely from even up to 300 miles away, it's just not sitting right with me. Afterwards, let me go back. All salvage operations are completed in close coordination with the Unified Command. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. They're just giving a lot of spin. So there's just more photos I want to show you guys. You can see there. And now this is the Black Hawk in its watery grave. Crazy, right? So there it is. If you haven't seen that already. Here they are getting more pieces of the plane. Again, they're not touching the Black Hawk for now. We have this. There's more of the plane. So let's get over into the arrests that have been made. I had to hop onto X because dealing with news articles is just a mess. But it says they've been arrested and already released. But the video they released looked more like video taken from a cell phone. It's probably against workplace rules to record any videos of aircraft while on the work site. That's why probably baggage handlers that are, baggage handler level employees release the main video everyone has seen. So this is the guy, this is one of the main guys, Mohammed Mbenge, I don't know how to pronounce it, and Jonathan Savoy. For some reason, they don't have Jonathan Savoy's picture, but they've already been released. So what are we actually doing here, folks? And here's a better picture of him. I don't think he had any involvement. I think he's just a guy that worked there. He saw a plane, he saw the collision or he saw this going on or heard the chatter and filmed it. But they're been released. So does that mean they didn't really do anything illegal? Maybe it was just against workplace policy, which is a big difference. Now I want to give you something that looks very shady. Like this, like I said, I'm not believing anything that the government says. I feel like we have to read between the lines until we can get to the truth because the government lies. If you're not, make sure you follow me on Real Melanie King over on X because I put out a lot of stuff, try to update you guys of things going on over there. But it says Captain Rebecca Lobach, who is one of the 3 pilots in the fatal Black Hawk helicopter crash, is pictured here handing out medals of freedom with Joe Biden flanked by Hillary Clinton in the photo. Just about 4 weeks ago. I don't believe in coincidences. This doesn't pass the smell test. Now, there is a TikToker's video that they included. Let's play that.
This is the pilot. So you're telling me 4 weeks ago, she's side by side with the president giving Medal of Freedoms. And then she's flying a Black Hawk helicopter 200 feet above and crashes into another plane. Investigate.
Now, here is a clearer video, as you can see, with her and Biden and Hillary Clinton right there passing out these medals. What is going on? Are you telling me that this is on the up and up, that this makes sense? I know it looks like the video's frozen, but I promise you it's not. It's just, they're just literally just standing there.
Of our distinct style as a nation of dreamers and doers.
Rebecca Lobach, co-pilot of the Black Hawk that crashed into AA passenger plane, killing 67 people, social media accounts all but disappeared on Instagram, Facebook, X, YouTube, Twitch, Tumblr, which once exposed her job as White House aide for Biden, DEI hire, lesbian, attended lots of pride events. Child. Let me see, because people are getting into DEI, but I don't think she really did it. Something about this is not sitting right. So that's her there. That's her, policy. And then even her at the White House podium in the press room. There she is pictured there again. And I believe this is her father, who also, people are investigating. Now, this is a view inside of a Black Hawk, and many are saying, okay, was this a self-delete mission where they were supposed to do this? Or was it self-piloted? We're not going to have these answers, but this is inside of a Black Hawk. And it's like, really, they just happened to crash with all of this advanced technology on it, just happened to collide with this plane on accident. And we're not going to get the full manifest of who was actually on that plane. The passenger list that they put out, guys, please know, in my opinion, and most people's opinion, is not going to be the real list. Yes, there were real victims that were part of this, but this happens all the time. The American government, they have an agenda, and casualties are to be expected. So I do believe that there are real victims, but I do not believe the real target has been identified. And here's another person. What are the chances that the female pilot for the Black Hawk that rammed into that American Airlines flight also served as an aide under Biden? That's just too close to home, because I don't believe in weird coincidences anymore. So there's more pictures of her there. And finally, I want to show you this one. It says Rebecca Lobach was still in ROTC training in 2018. How was she flying government continuity missions in a Black Hawk in Washington, D.C. 6 years later as a captain? And how did she afford a $520,000 house 2 years into the military? I think these are legit questions. Will we ever get answers? No, because they'll say that it's classified. I don't know if Trump will release this. I don't know what's going on or is part of national security, but they have, the receipts, the documents that, to show. In fact, let me pull it up so you can see it better. Let's make this bigger. So this is her property. Okay. And Woodbridge, Virginia is expensive. Okay. Prince Williams County is no joke. It is very expensive. Now, it is farther from DC. I would say it's like, with traffic, you're looking at over an hour of commute to get to Washington, DC. I don't know where she actually was, where she reported to work, but it's still expensive. All of the DC area is very, very pricey. And so this $520,000, I would have to see what the house looks like, but usually people do move further out to afford more. But this makes no sense for someone at her level to be able to afford this. Guys, make sure, again, like I said, you're following me on Real Melanie King on X, as well as check out my merch, realmelanieking.com.
Coffee. Follow me.